We'll get started. Welcome, everybody. I'll call to order the work session of the Billings City Council on July 19, 2021. Before we jump into our agenda for this evening, I'll, in just a minute, ask Kevin Iflin to tell us what happened to our city administrator. But the pattern has been whenever Chris isn't here, we have really short meetings, right? So I see a thumbs up from Kevin. We'll see whether that pattern holds tonight. Or before I turn it over to Kevin, however, I just want to make two quick comments. One is to thank members of the city airport staff, the airport police, the Billings Police Department, Yellowstone County Sheriff's Office, Montana Highway Patrol, many other volunteers and individuals who were involved with receiving today the remains of Lieutenant Alva Ray Krugman, who died in Laos almost 50 years ago while flying an front operation or observation plane, basically a twin prop Cessna, over Laos when he was shot down. And his remains are coming back to Orland, Wyoming, and there were several hundred people to receive him and to show appreciation to his family up there today. And it was a moving opportunity, but took a lot of work by those people I mentioned and others, so thank you to them. Second thing is there's a lot of attention in the press now about our rising COVID numbers. Because of the Delta variant, the number of COVID cases are up in every state in the United States. With more cases, there is the possibility of more mutation. There is certainly the certainty of more hospitalization and death for those who are not vaccinated. So I continue to encourage everybody to get vaccinated, but also here in council, we try to follow those CDC guidelines, which call for persons who are not vaccinated in public places to continue to wear masks to protect themselves, but also to reduce the transmission from the unvaccinated to others who may be unvaccinated, or even theoretically those who have been vaccinated. So please continue to do that. If you are not vaccinated, to wear a mask. We encourage that. And if there are any council members who want to comment on that, I know that Councilmember Trickey, he's the guy behind the mask here today, did want to comment on that topic, so I'll let him do so. Councilmember Trickey.
So I'm going to assume that everyone in the room is vaccinated and that no one in the room's immune system is compromised, and therefore I'm not going to wear my mask today. And I just want to say for the record that I haven't been doing it to protect myself. I've been doing it to protect those who have not been vaccinated or whose systems are compromised. So, and if you don't want to own up to it publicly, you can just tell a staff person, and if I need to, I'll put it back on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, absolutely, and we won't go around and have a show of hands, but if you have not been vaccinated and you communicate that to staff or to me or individual council members, that'd probably be good, and then we know the level that we should take of caution in our own wearing of masks. With that, I'll turn it over to Kevin, Councilmember Neese.
Yeah, just along that, if I see some hand sanitizer here and some in the back, are there masks in the back? If someone did want to choose to have a mask?
Excellent question. Thank you. I do not know if there are masks back there. There should be. If there's not, we'll make sure that they are provided in future meetings. Okay. Well, thank you for calling that out. So we'll make sure that those are provided. Kevin Iflin, our Assistant City Administrator, is leading us from the staff tonight. So Kevin, do you have anything to offer before we jump into our legislative wrap-up, our first item of business?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. City Administrator Kukulski could not be here this evening. He's actually in the cool-down version of Phoenix, a little bit cooler than we are here, I believe, for a week. Thought he'd escape the heat and go down there. With that being said, I've just got one item. In the Friday packet, there was a request to have a council representative for the Billings Community Transportation Safety Committee, and we've not received any response yet from a council member. So if there's anybody here tonight that's willing to step up and be on that committee, we'd certainly appreciate that at this point.
Okay, thank you. I saw Councilmember Trickey's hand go up, is that right? So if anybody else is interested, you can meet afterwards, and whoever comes out of the fray will be the selection, or more seriously, feel free to discuss with Councilmember Trickey, but we do need somebody to serve on that committee, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And with that, if we're ready to get rolling, I need to teleconference in Greg Dorrington and Amy Grimals from Helena for our legislative wrap-up, if you're ready.
Please do.
It seems so old school.
Yeah, one step up from smoke signals, but barely.
This is Greg.
Mr. Dorrington, this is Kevin Ifland. We've got you on the line with City Council, and then I'm just going to dial in Amy Grimals. So if for some reason, if I lose you, we'll give you a call back.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Feels like going 2 steps backward.
It's really.
This is Amy.
Ms. Grimals, this is Kevin Ifland. We've got you live in front of City Council, and I'm going to try to get Greg back on the line and have you both here if you're ready.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, Greg, are you on the line now?
I'm still here.
Okay, we've got you all set up, ready to go, and I believe Amy's on the line, so whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and begin.
Perfect. Well, hello, everyone. Greg and Amy here. We were just going to give sort of our final legislative presentation, and I thought what we would do is kind of start with an overview of the legislative session and some general observations and feedback, and then I can jump in and talk a little bit more about the legislation affecting the city of Billings, and then transition to the interim session and kind of see where things are on the horizon and what to pay attention to in the next 18 months or so. And I know Amy has some limitations on her schedule this evening, so I'm going to let her go ahead and go first and talk about kind of her general thoughts and overview of the session, and then she's going to jump into ARPA for a few minutes, and then I'll take over from there, if that sounds all right.
That sounds good.
Thanks. Thank you, Greg, and thanks to the council. And we really appreciate being able to work with all of you this last legislative session. I have to say, in my 20 years, it was one to remember. So we'll start off with kind of the facts. So the facts are that the legislature convened for 80 days out of a possible 90. They saved 10 days, in quotes, because technically the legislature was funded for those days. And so they, quote unquote, saved another 10 legislative days to potentially deal with more money coming into the state from the federal government with infrastructure spending and a package that many of us thought might pass.
Hold on here 1 second.
Earlier. Oh, yes, that's okay.
Hold on 1 second here.
Thank you, Amy. On this end, the technology is not working perfectly. It's a little garbled, and so, but we can still hear you. But what will be very helpful is if you slow down between words and sentences and just go a little bit slower. I think that will help us to hear better. So go ahead and try that.
Did you hear that, Amy?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you. The legislature met for 80 days, and they saved 10 days. So if the federal government passes another bill that funds infrastructure, the legislature will come back and use those quote-unquote saved days to fund infrastructure projects. The facts are that there were 1,313 bills introduced. There were 724 bills that passed and 589 bills that died. That's more bills that passed than in the past 8 sessions. There were also the smallest number of vetoes in 16 years, which is not surprising because this is the first time in 16 years that the Republican legislature had a Republican governor. I did think when I looked at the veto counts, which are on the Montana Legislative website, there were 17 vetoes, and the inverse number 71, there were 71 vetoes in 2013. To put that number in perspective, 71 was one of the highest numbers in Montana's history, but it's still an interesting commentary on the interaction between the executive branch and the legislative branch. Those are some general numbers to share. If I think about reflections for the council, we had a good working relationship overall with our Billings area delegation, and Greg and I want to thank each of you for reaching out to members of the Billings area legislative body this session. It was very helpful. I would make the reflection that we have a lot of new people in the executive branch and in the legislature, and we will see how that develops over the years. There was a big push by the executive branch to look at the red tape commission that will be in the interim and efficiencies in government. I would be happy to answer any questions about the general feeling of the legislature or any other general thoughts about it. I know we met with you frequently, so I've tried to keep this part short before I give you the ARPA update. So I will pause, Kevin, to see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Amy. Council, any questions from council members before we have Amy move on to the American Rescue Plan topic? Councilmember Neese.
Mayor, I have a question whether we should proceed with this and have them come in person and just put this on another work session. This is just too hard to hear.
Council, are you getting enough to make that, what's your preference? I think I can personally hear it enough. It's a little difficult, but we'll see how Greg comes across as well. But is there others who would like us to put this item off?
Is there a reason why they didn't appear in person?
So Councilmember Neese, it's a scheduling issue a lot of times, and we did have them scheduled previously to this, but then we had to cancel and move some things around. So it's comes down to a scheduling issue of trying to get 2 people to travel from Helena down here on a Monday evening and specific Monday evenings on a work session.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to hear Greg first. Okay. All right, Councilman Prington. That was your thought. Okay. Okay. So, Amy, why don't you go ahead, and we appreciate your slowing down. That does help. So, go ahead and tell us about ARPA and your situation there. If you're on speakerphone, you might also just pick up the handset if that's possible. That might help a little bit, but it is better. So thank you very much. Go ahead.
Thank you. I apologize. I speak too quickly. I hope that you can hear me better now. The ARPA funds coming into the state of Montana are bigger than the state budget. The funds are $2.7 billion. In my recollection, this is the first time that the legislature has given authority for spending dollars to quasi-executive legislative commissions. There are 4 commissions set up to spend the ARPA dollars. The big one to watch is the ARPA Economic Transformation and Stabilization Workforce Development Commission, which is a long title. They meet the 21st in 2 days. They had an introductory meeting, and our understanding is that they will set up the framework for taking proposals to spend these dollars at the meetings this week. And at the following meetings, they will then start voting on proposals. The website for submitting proposals is up and running as of last week, and we can talk about that further. The second commission working on spending the ARPA dollars is the ARPA Health Advisory Commission. That is meeting next Monday, the 26th. The third commission is the ARPA Infrastructure Commission. That is meeting Tuesday, July 27th. And finally, the fourth commission, the ARPA Communications Commission, is meeting August 11th. These 4 commissions will meet monthly or every other monthly, and they are working on that agenda. Mike Foster, who was the Director of Agriculture under Governor Gianforte, has taken over as Director of the ARPA funds. Mr. Foster has spent many days in Billings in his previous life as he represented all the Catholic hospitals for many years. He is a former legislator and will do a great job working on this, as he told me, 20 hours a day. I would be happy to answer any general questions about the ARPA commissions, but they are really starting to move forward this week. And so we will be following that in the interim and are happy to continue to work on advising the the city council going forward.
Great. Thank you very much. We do have at least one question, Amy, from a council member. Council member Pam Purington.
Hi, Amy. Thank you. I didn't catch the gentleman's name that you said, and is he over all of these commissions or just that economic transformation and stabilization?
Thank you, and I apologize. He is in charge of the oversight of all of the ARPA commissions, but each commission has a chair and vice chair. And we can send that information following this call.
So that's Mike Foster.
Oh, Mike Foster, okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Amy on ARPA? Before we go to Greg Dorrington. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Amy, did you say they're meeting to look at proposals that have been submitted already, or are they just meeting to get their game plan together?
Thank you for the question. They are meeting to set up an outline these next meetings, and we'll start evaluating proposals. I know proposals are being submitted every day now to that website.
Mayor, follow up on that?
Go ahead.
And I don't know if this is to Amy or to Kevin, but of these different 4 categories, is there a list of what the city has been submitting as far as proposals for each of those categories?
So Mayor and Councilmember Neese, yes, we could provide that. My understanding is that Public Works submitted 8 different proposals under those guidelines, so we can get you that list.
I think that was under the infrastructure, but what about the other 3 categories?
I would have to check, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Amy before we hear from Greg? Don't see any, so thank you, Amy. Greg said you had to leave, so it's completely up to you if you want to stay with us or get off. We will not take it personally if you've got other places to be. So with that, Greg.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Can each of you hear me okay? Am I coming in all right?
Yeah, that's better. So you're sounding pretty good.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks again for everyone for being here. With Amy's sort of overview and reflections, I'm going to take a different approach and look a little bit more focused on sort of the legislation that impacts the city of Billings. And first, I'm going to take a quick look at the numbers and the stats. As part of your council packet for today's meeting, there should have been a final end of session report dated July 15th. It looks similar to our other reports that we've sent to the body, but it's updated as of July 15th. And as you'll see, we tracked 188 bills for the city over the course of the legislative session. The report includes each of those bills, the position taken, and the current status of those bills, whether it died, was passed, and became law, etc. Out of those 188 bills, we actively supported 15 of them. Of those 15, 9 passed and 6 died. So just in terms of a success rate, if you're keeping track, that's right at about 60% on bills that were supported. In bills we actively opposed, there were 32. 20 of those died and 12 passed and became law. So again, about a 62% success rate for opposed bills. So in the realm of the legislature, that's not bad. But it was, as usual, mostly a defensive effort this session. As you can tell, we opposed about twice as many bills as we supported, which isn't altogether unusual. In terms of themes for the session, I really didn't want to go through and go point by point with all the bills, but I thought just pulling out some of the major themes might be more productive. And then I can address follow-up questions. And in fact, the local government interim committee has a really nice summary of local government legislation that was passed this last session, which I would be more than happy to send you all a copy, or I can send it to Mr. Iflin to distribute. I didn't make the July 15th cutoff to get that into your packets, but it's really kind of a handy cheat sheet to see all the bills that passed and what they are. But the themes of the session really it was really about individual liberty and local control when you're talking about the local government level and related bills. We saw a willingness of the legislature to really scale back on local government control in a number of areas. And when we saw them do this, not always, but in a lot of occasions, it was when there was the perception of tension between the authority of the local government on the one hand and the rights and freedoms of individuals on the other hand. And so when that tension played out, whether it was real or perceived, what we often saw with this legislature is that they were willing to elevate the rights of the individual over the local control authority of the local governments. So that was definitely a bit of a shift this year. A few examples, I mean, we really saw this tension come out in the public health context. Obviously, that rose to the forefront due to the pandemic. There were state and local restrictions in place, mask mandates, gathering size limitations, things of that nature. And there was a perception by some that these were really restrictions on individual freedoms and liberties. And so what we saw as a result of that was a slew of bills that came out that sought to scale back the power and authority of local government, boards of health, et cetera, to respond to public health emergencies. And there was this need for accountability of the rules and regulations that were issued. And so, for example, one of the bills that did end up passing provides that emergency public health rules would need to be approved by locally elected officials for them to remain in effect. And that was HB 121. There were bills that limited local government from interfering with individual access to goods and services. And then we also saw restrictions placed on government entities with respect to the ability to refuse services, employment, or accommodations based on vaccine status. And if vaccine status was used to withhold services or employment, that could be a discrimination claim under HB 702. So that was one area of public health where we really saw that tension play out. We saw some limitations in local government control from permitting sale of alternative nicotine and vapor products. We also saw a lot of action in the land use context. Lots and lots of bad land use bills came up, and frankly, a lot of them were beaten back during the course of the session. And part of this was due to the fact that stakeholders, the league, NACO, the realtors, contractors are all working together prior to the 2021 session and even now to take a real comprehensive look at land use planning statutes. And rather than addressing issues piecemeal, it was decided in the local government committees during the session that you know what, we should let those bills die and come back in 2023 and deal with a much more comprehensive package that all stakeholders could agree on. So that's still kind of a work in progress, and I'm sure Wyeth Friday can speak to the status of that process. In kind of the tax and revenue area, again, some more restrictions on local control. We saw a repeal of the local option gas tax. We saw some restrictions and sunset provisions put on special districts and require extensions through resolution or referendum. And then just kind of in I put it in the miscellaneous category, but there was a sanctuary city bill that basically prohibited local governments from adopting any sort of policy restricting employees from complying with federal immigration detainer requests. Additional restrictions on local governments from enforcing federal bans on regulation of firearms, and on and on. So those are just some examples where we really saw that tension between individual liberties and local control play out. And like I said, I'll try and circulate that summary of that legislation put together by the local government interim committee after this meeting so that you all have it. One bit of success that I did want to highlight was the City of Billings bill that was the primary backer of, which was HB 578, We've talked about it a lot through the course of the session. That's the one that has to do with the DOC commits and the requirement for DOC to take custody of those individuals within 5 days. And if they don't, they've got to notify the court why they haven't taken custody of those individuals. The whole idea, obviously, is to kind of get DOC commits out of our local jails and into the state system so that we create room and space for local criminals so that you have that capacity within your local jails. Not a single no vote on that bill, not in committee, not on the floor. So it passed 100% all the way through, which is great. I think it is something that we do probably that city need to follow up on by coordinating with county prosecutors and just to see how that bill is working. Is it helping? Is it not helping? What else can be done? Should we be thinking of, other bills or options for 2023 or into the interim? So that's something I would just kind of put on the council's radar to follow moving forward. That's kind of just the general summary. Due to the nature of this kind of crazy hybrid legislative session, there were challenges and there were some real silver linings, which was kind of nice. The city was really able to provide some great testimony. I think we had probably 6 or 7 different city representatives other than Amy and myself testify before the committees. Which is just fantastic, and thanks to all of you who participated and got involved in the process. It's really great for the legislators to hear directly from you. So I really appreciate that involvement, and I hope you found it useful as well. So I'm going to go ahead and, Mr. Mayor and council members, I'm going to pause there for just a second before I kind of transition to the interim session. And things on the horizon. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take those now.
Okay, council, we'll hear a little more from Greg about the interim coming up, but are there any questions based on the past session? Don't see any, Greg, so go ahead if you've got forecast on the interim.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So looking forward into the interim session, things are just now kind of getting rolling. Just as a reminder to everyone, during the legislative session that just ended, 28 study bills were passed. And these are bills that are assigned out to all the different interim legislative committees for them to research issues and potentially develop legislation for the upcoming legislative session. And what they do with those 28 bills, they circulate them all to the legislators and they poll them and rank them. So they kind of figure out which one should have the highest priority. The highest priority study bill this year is a study on residential property taxes that's going to be before the Revenue Interim Committee. So that might be a good one to kind of keep tabs on, as that's an important one for obviously city and local government funding. You might want to just keep tabs on that and see how that develops. So the interim committees have now been organized. They've got their membership. They've started having their organizational meetings where they get together, they get their chairs, vice chairs voted in, and then they start developing a work plan. So they take all the studies that have been assigned to them and all the other topics that they need to work on during the interim, and then they allocate time and resources to those. So that's what the organization meeting is. And really the city's interest, I mean, it really covers the waterfront and cuts across a lot of different topics and a lot of different interim committees, but really the one to follow chiefly is the local government interim committee. And they held their organizational meeting on just last week on July 13th and started developing its work plan. The city of Billings does have a couple of representatives on that committee. Some familiar names, Representative Larry Brewster and Representative Kathy Kelker. So some good folks to have on that committee, and if you need to reach out to anybody on local government issues, those are two great people to reach out to. But what I thought I'd do is just sort of run down the topics that the local government interim committee is going to address, so that you know what's coming down the pike and what to pay attention to. So in order of priority, and by that I mean how much time the committee is going to dedicate to the particular issue, I'll just kind of work from top to bottom. So the highest priority issue that they're going to work on is the HJ30 study, which is a study of water and sewer districts. This was sponsored by Representative Brewster when his water and sewer bill died in the legislature. So he brought this study bill. The current statutes are old, outdated, hard to understand. So there is a need to study that statutory scheme and update the language. And so that's one that you might want to keep tabs on as it may impact local water and sewer districts. There was some discussion of wrapping in special districts as well. I mean, those are very separate creatures, obviously, but the committee was interested in looking into special districts as well and kind of wrapping that into the discussion. We'll see how that develops. Next topic is SJ23, which is a study about allowing public notice to occur via electronic means. Now, this is not about holding public meetings remotely or electronically. It's just about providing the notice electronically. The league stood up during the committee meeting and supported that idea, said it wasn't a huge priority for them, but and mentioned that they had developed some other legislation about holding remote meetings via Zoom, which I think this body probably recollects from the session. It didn't ultimately pass, but the league is still interested in pursuing that potentially. SJ13 is the next priority study, which is a study of prevailing wage laws. And just by way of background, there is a requirement out there to pay prevailing wage, and it applies to public works contracts by states, counties, cities, etc. For contracts over a certain monetary threshold, I think it's $25,000. And the Montana Department of Labor and Industry sets that prevailing wage rate. This study would look at the breakover point at which prevailing wage applies. So is that $25,000 point appropriate? Should it be higher? Should it be lower? It also looks at the methodology by which Department of Labor calculates the prevailing wage. Are they doing it appropriately? Do any modifications need to occur? So that's the prevailing wage study. And those are all the assigned studies to the committee. There's also a number of member topics that were brought up by individual committee members. The first is affordable housing, homelessness, and accessory dwelling units. So this is kind of priority number 4 for the committee. These issues came up a ton during the session, were very important to the city. We participated and testified on a lot of these issues, and obviously city leaders deal with these on a daily basis. So this is a topic that I think is definitely worth following, and should probably just keep tabs on moving forward. Next priority is public health bills. A small amount of the committee's time is going to be spent just reviewing all the public health bills that were passed and to see how they're being implemented. What's working, what's not? Are there inconsistencies between and among the bills? Are fixes needed? It's hard to say. And I would note that, as Amy alluded to, there were these 10 legislative days that were kind of held back by the legislature that they could potentially use later on in either potentially in a special session or just a opening of regular session again. procedurally, I'm not sure which route they would take, but Senator Est noted if there is some reconvening of the legislature in some manner, he advised the League and MACO to get together soon to start working on any legislative fixes that are needed for those public health bills. So if the city, if you're noticing any issues with the implementation of those bills, definitely get in touch with the League and MACO, or coordinate with Amy and I, and we can get in touch with them to talk about what might be needed, if necessary. Finally, the last kind of two topics they're going to be following are homeowner associations. I think this is partially in light of the condo collapse in Florida. They just want to take a closer look at that governing law. It's pretty low priority for them, but it's on the agenda anyway, or the work plan. And then they will be getting routine updates on that land use planning and subdivision review that's being conducted by various stakeholders. They're going to get some updates on the coal trust. And then the MARA study, which I'm going to talk about more here in just a minute. But overall, local government interim committee looks like a good group. They're going to work well together. They did reserve a bit of their work plan budget for carryover or additional issues. So if there's anything that the city is super interested in having them look into, they might have a little bit of room for it. And just get in touch with Amy and I, and we can talk about that. The next meeting is going to be in September. And then I did want to talk about this MARA committee. I'm not sure if Mr. Mayor, the council has heard of it, but it's part of the Legislative Finance Committee. It's like basically a subcommittee. But last session, HB 330 directed LFC, which is the Legislative Finance Committee, to conduct a quote-unquote financial modernization and risk analysis study. I think that's a government-y type of way of saying, let's look at the revenue sufficiency and estimate long-term expenditures by state and local governments for services that they're going to provide and see how they match up. So that's what their plan is. And they're going to look for areas with revenue challenges based on geography, demographics, economics, etc. The committee is chaired by Representative Lou Jones, and Representative Brewster indicated at the last local government interim committee meeting that he met with Chair Jones, who indicated that the MARA committee is going to specifically look at how to predict spending for local governments. It's a big issue for him. And that's going to include a review of special districts and other revenue sources that cities bring in that aren't considered quote-unquote tax and aren't typically represented in kind of their growth in spending or growth in government metrics. So from Chair Jones's perspective, there is a concern that local government spending's growing faster than inflation and that some cities are using special districts to raise a lot of money to basically fund that. So I know special districts are kind of a hot button issue, so I just wanted to flag that for the council, that we addressed a lot of it during the session. There's going to be more discussion about special districts from a fiscal perspective. And then we're going to kind of see how those fiscal issues link up with policy discussions that are going on in the other interim committees. So again, you probably want to keep tabs on the MARA committee for that reason alone. They're also going to be looking at property tax issues and TIF. So if you need additional reasons to pay attention to MARA, those are them as well. So next meeting is August 24th for MARA. So those are kind of the key things that I wanted to at least flag for the council, and as things sort of get rolling during this 18-month interim session before our next regular session, those are kind of the key points. And it's I think up to the council how you want to deploy Amy and I, whether you want us to attend those meetings, just monitor them, listen into them. We're open to feedback and discussion about all those things. So I'll pause there, Mr. Mayor and council, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate the details of your report. We'll turn it over to the council for questions. I'll just start off with one or a comment. The HJ 23 public notice by electronic means, if that morphs and gets larger, one thing that at least I would be interested in is the interim committee looking at the possibility of clarifying and specifically authorizing electronic attendance at council meetings or other government bodies. As you know, there's an issue because of the use of the word observe in, I think, maybe the state constitutional provision and in the statute about whether that's permitted, for council members to attend by Zoom. We would have our own internal rules about that, I would assume, but that was something that the AG opinion addressed with emergency status once the emergency was declared, but went away. So that topic is still out there.
Right, that's great comments, and I think that's a really fair point. And we'll keep tabs on the development of SJ 23 and see if it expands into electronic attendance as well.
Thank you very much. Other questions? I saw Councilmember Purington and Yakowicz. Councilmember Purington?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Greg. So with this interim session, would there be some committees that address the medical marijuana? Because I know towards the end of the session, like the last day, they were just scampering with some of these bills and amendments to 701. And the language is not clear in that bill at all. So will they start addressing those during the interim session, or are they going to wait till the legislative session?
Thanks, Councilmember Purington. I think I heard most of that. It was a question about implementation of the recreational marijuana program. Is that correct?
Well, and also the medical, because I know they were working on the medical as well, and that was defeated like on the very last day, but it was pretty well rushed. The whole thing was rushed through the last 2 days, is my understanding.
Correct. So, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Purington, that's the study bill is SJ 31, and so there is a study out there for implementation of the marijuana program. I believe it addresses both recreational and medical. It's been assigned to the Economic Affairs Interim Committee. I would have to follow up with that committee to get a little bit more detailed information about where they're headed with that. But I believe there is some proactive movement to, continue to evaluate the implementation of the program and see whether fixes are needed. If fixes are urgent, I mean, they've got kind of multiple options. If there's a special session or they reconvene the legislature between sessions, they may be able to address it then if it's a big enough issue, or they'll likely have a package of bills that they'll work on for cleanup of those programs that will be addressed in the 2023 session.
Thank you. Councilmember Yakowicz?
Thank you, Honored Council. A comment and a question. Greg, you were very helpful in providing some of us opportunity to speak, at, whether through Zoom or other ways. I would just like to encourage you, I won't be on council in a year or two, and I think that your ability, and with Mr. Iflin and Mr. Kukulski, to guide us along the way to be able to speak was very good. And I just wanted you to let you know that some of us needed that help, and I'm sure other council along the way will appreciate that help, whether they go to Helena or if they do it by Zoom again, I'm not sure. So I just want to encourage you to take us sometimes by our hand as council, and you will have even more council there in support. So thank you for your hard work on that. My question is real simple. of all the things you just said, what's one that we should sink our teeth into as a council? If you could put on your thinking cap, what would be just one that percolates to the top?
Right. Well, thank you very much, Deputy Mayor, for your comments and kind words. To address your question, one issue, I mean, I think the affordable housing, homelessness, and accessory dwelling unit issue that is going to be taken up by the local government interim committee is a very important one. There are many, many issues confronting the city, but I think that one is incredibly important as we hear so much about the challenges of developing downtown Billings with the homelessness and unrest on the streets. Having some affordable housing option could really help benefit the city and deal with some of those issues and incapacitation issues, things that keep coming up again and again and again and really take up a lot of city resources. So I think, to me, I mean, just looking at some of these, I think that's an incredibly important issue that the city could engage in and maybe make some inroads with this committee in partnership with other cities and local governments.
So Greg, simply put, what does that mean for council and potentially for our city? Do we go to these committee meetings? Just walk me through that, practically speaking. How do we support?
Sure, absolutely.
Affordable housing?
Yep, absolutely, Deputy Mayor. So it can come in a variety of different ways, right? So you can absolutely, if that's something that the council would like to engage in, having participation at the local government committee meetings is very important. That means standing up and testifying, coming to the table and sharing your perspectives, the problems and issues that the city of Billings is facing, and then some proposed solutions. And that's the hard part, is coming up with some proposals that would work, not only for Billings, but statewide, since we're dealing with state law, or conceivably state law or a bill. And that's going to probably, require working with other stakeholders, other cities that are involved and share the same issues, and maybe other cities that don't have the same issues, but making sure that whatever proposals work for the Billings and Missoulas and Bozeman's of the world also work for, the smaller communities in eastern Montana and elsewhere. And so, some of that work can be delegated to us, to Amy and I. It's probably best to have individual council members who take this issue to heart and would be willing to communicate with other representatives or individuals. Obviously, working with the local Billings delegation would be extremely useful and important to get their perspectives. I think Kathy Kelker, Representative Kelker, would be a very good individual to at least reach out to and speak to on this issue and get her feedback and thoughts. But those are just kind of some general concrete steps. And then just talking, within the body itself, the council itself, what do you want to see happen? What is the objective that the council would like to see come out of legislation or otherwise, and then working towards that? I think those are just kind of some off-the-cuff thoughts, at least in terms of actionable steps.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Council, anything else before we move on to public comment on this item? Okay, quick, we'll try to wrap up. We're almost an hour on this item. We've got 3 other long issues. So, Councilmember Purington.
A question for Kevin. Do we have, I did not see that report that he said. Do we have that? It wasn't in our packet, I don't believe.
Councilmember Purington, it should be in your weekly report, the Administrator's weekly report that came out on Friday.
Okay. And then so Greg and Amy are hired through the city throughout the year. And so if and when we decide that we want to pursue some of these legislative issues, then the city can contact them at any time. And I would imagine that we do that through city administrator's office.
That's correct, yes. And we're still in contact with Greg and Amy throughout the interim session. They're always giving us heads up of things that are coming up and things of that nature, so yes.
So Kevin, maybe we should schedule another one of these in the relatively near future. Maybe you could work with Greg and Amy to find a good date that would fit to give us an update on what's happening on these four interim committees in particular. Councilmember Neese.
Mayor, and I don't know if this isn't to Greg, or maybe it is, but Kevin, we had a meeting with all the legislators on a Zoom meeting. I can't remember, Penny, I think you were on there. And I thought that was a really good meeting that we got to talk to the legislators and put forward the council agenda and let the legislators know what was going on. And so if this is happening, you know, I think that was a little late because the session was already starting. I think we need to start doing that now and even through these interims. And then, so when it come times for the next legislator, we've got a good relationship between the legislators and the council. And I'd like to see more of those meetings. And I don't know if we can or can't do Zoom on some of that because it's not an official meeting. But if we can work something like that where you can get some of these meetings together, I think we can talk about what we want to see in the city and get our legislators on the same page.
Thank you. Okay, council, let's move to public comment on item number 1. If anybody is in the audience would like to come forward to offer their comment on the first item, legislative wrap-up, please do so. I'll actually keep your comments to 3 minutes or less and tell us your name and address up front. Do we have anybody who would like to comment on this item number 1? Not seeing anybody rushing to the podium, so we will close the public comment period on this and move on to item number 2 if there's nothing else from council on item number 1. Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to digress a little bit, what's the status could we be able to have these folks on Zoom in the future? Will we be able to do that at all rather than the telephone?
Councilmember Boyette, yes, that's our goal, is to get this room retrofitted with the Zoom capability similar to what we had in the library. Again, we're just waiting on some parts and pieces and technology.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move then to item number 2, our emergency preparedness presentation by Yellowstone County Disaster and Emergency Services Director Casey Williams. Casey.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I have a little PowerPoint. I was asked, I've been asked several questions over the course of several weeks. A little bit about what DES is, what it does. Also had some questions about our emergency operations plan. And so I just kind of put a small presentation together to try to address some of those. And then afterwards would be more than happy to answer any specific questions that you may have on DES as we go forward. Can I move it with this thing? There we go. So a little bit about what emergency management is. That's a formal definition. The organization and management of resources, responsibilities for dealing with all aspects of emergencies. In a nutshell, what it is you wake up every morning and say, what could possibly go wrong and what could we do to make the impact of that less impactful on the community? And that's pretty much what emergency management does, is we look at the whole of the community, all of the people, all of the assets, all of the property, what could go wrong, and then how can we minimize the negative effect and long-lasting effects of anything that would go wrong in our community. Am I doing this wrong? Here we go. So on any particular given day, emergency management, my job is to look at these bubbles. We have the mission areas. These are the 5 mission areas that go all the way from the federal government, the state government, local government. These are defined by the federal government and through FEMA: prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. And then all of the little bubbles that are in those are the core capabilities that kind of help develop that particular mission area. So on any given day, and every day, my world revolves around these 5 mission areas and the core capabilities under them. And you'll see that there's planning across all of them. There's public information and warning across all of them. There's communication across all of those. And then some of them get into more specific. The thing that I think is critical is in a lot of communities, and we're no different, this is an issue that happens throughout our country, we spend most of our resources on response. All right, response is 20% of the picture, and we tend to under-invest time and resources on the other 80%. And it's been proven time and time again across our nation and through studies that for every dollar you spend on the prevention, preparedness, and mitigation, you save $12 to $15 on response, because ultimately response is the most costly element of any type of emergency management effort when we do that. So it is something that we're trying to change in our community, and as your DES coordinator, I'm trying to move us into some of these things. I know we've looked at it, the council's looked at things about crime prevention. It's not, we have the mill levies coming out. That's not all about responding. We have to do some things so that our responses are more efficient, more effective, and things like that. So, man, you're good. Way to go. I put this up here just as a general overview. The principles of Yellowstone County emergency management are in line with that of the state and the federal government to be comprehensive, progressive, risk-driven, integrated, collaborative, coordinated, flexible, and professional. Those are the key principles that we operate under. The Yellowstone County DES office is in line with all of the federal requirements, the presidential directives 5, 8, 21. We are NIMS compliant, which is the national, how we do our incident command structure, the National Incident Management System, the National Response Framework. So all of our plans and all of our activities fall in line with those things as well. Go ahead. Just to give you an idea, so the emergency management system in the country as well as here is based on the National Response Framework. And the National Response Framework gives us a guide to how we're going to respond to anything that would happen. Our emergency operations plan is based on this National Response Framework. It's a whole community plan. It integrates an all hazards look at it. Our plans in the past were these huge, thick binders where you tried to think of everything that could go wrong and how you would specifically address and respond to that particular thing. Well, there's just too much. And ultimately what we found was across the nation and every time we have a lot of general commonalities on to how you respond, whether it's a hazmat issue, a fire, a car wreck, or a law enforcement issue. There's certain elements and resources that come to bear. So the nation has transferred and transformed over into an all hazards response plan. So has the city of Billings in Yellowstone County. Go ahead. Our emergency response plan, and I forgot which of the council members specifically asked me this question, but it is developed around what we call emergency support functions. There are 15 emergency support functions, and depending on what goes wrong, and I'll use the flood we had due to the BBWA the other day. That emergency response to that issue required public works. It required some communications. It required law enforcement. It required fire. So we had all of those things. Well, each of those represents an emergency response function that had to come to the table to, it required elected officials and the administrative staff as well. So we were able to pull all of those emergency support functions together, and each of those categories brings certain assets and resources so that we can get the, whatever went wrong fixed. And there's a list of resources that all those can pull from. And then these are our emergency support functions that are in our emergency operations plan. There's 15 of them. There's 15 of them at the state and 15 of them at the federal level, and they're all the same. And that's just a heads up. That's what it is when you look at that binder and you go through and see these emergency support functions. These are those. Today, I used ESF 10 on a particular issue. We use ESF 13, which is public safety and security and our law enforcement. That's a big topic here. The external affairs are y'all are the administrative bodies that make some of the executive decisions for us. We've spent an entire year dealing with ESF 8, public health and medical services. So as you can see, it's just a collection of different support functions that can bring to bear the assets and the tools that we need to, and that's how our emergency operations plan is designed. That's different than the emergency response plan that the fire department has, or the police department has, or AMR has. They have, this is how do I get the resources and all of the players at the game, right? They have the individual plays on how they're going to execute. So my job is give you the tools to win. Their job is execute and go win the game. So, go ahead. To give you an example, in our emergency operations plan, this is emergency operations plan, our ESF1. This comes straight out of our book. The ESF coordinator is Yellowstone County Public Works. The primary agency is the City of Billings and the City of Laurel Public Works. So if we have an issue like we did the other day with the ditch, my job is to make sure we can call on the City of Billings Public Works and get the tools and resources and information that they need and they have, so they can reach out to contractors. They can reach out to the state government for certain assets and resources and things like that. And so each one of these has a purpose. It has a scope. It goes all the way down into how they can, what resources they can pull on, how they get to those resources. And we are building annex after annex after annex to this plan to broaden our scope and build some resiliency into the plan and some functionality into the plan, more than just have a list of phone numbers. This is kind of something that I wanted to bring. It has nothing really to do with our emergency operations plan, but I think it's really important that the council understands. I've been here, I got here January the 2nd of 2019. We've had all but one of the top 15 hazards identified in our multi-hazard mitigation book. So the multi-hazard mitigation process was a team of stakeholders from all of our cities, the county, private industry, state, a couple of Fed people, engineers, and everybody got together and said, what are the most likely problems that we may face in Yellowstone County? These are the top 15. So I hear all of the time, people say, oh, that'll never happen here. Or, oh, that doesn't ever happen here. All of these things happen here. All of these things happen here on a fairly regular basis. Fire makes the headlines. And right now, goodness knows, we're in critical fire danger. But fire is only one of an extreme multitude of hazards and risks that the city of Billings faces on a regular day-to-day basis. We've had communicable disease problem. We've had 3 railroad accidents since I've been here. We have had the largest highway accident in Montana since I've been here. We've had a multi-million-dollar hailstorm last year, obviously wildfires. We've had ditch failures. We've had hazmat incidents, including again today. We didn't have a real problem with volcanic ash anytime soon. Dam failures, part of the dam failures is, I kind of go that into the ditch. We don't have a high-risk dam here. We've had 5 aircraft accidents in the 2.5 years that I've been here. So we have a lot of risks and there's 8,000, I'll say that again, 8,000 hazmat train cars that go through Billings on any given day. And it's right over here. We have 3 oil refineries. We've had oil spills. You've had a tornado. So the mindset of it never happens here, when I hear that, I'm like, what do you mean it doesn't happen? It happened 30 minutes ago. So we do have those. Let's go to the next slide, please. These are the top 8 that we've had. I have personally put number 3 as number 1, but I was outvoted by the committee, so they put severe weather and wildfire as our top 2. But we've had all of those. And it's really and truly my job and the emergency management job to look at these almost daily and try to figure out what can we do as a community and what can we do as a group of emergency response agencies and elected officials and council members and appointed officials to minimize the negative economic and humanitarian impact that these would have on our community. So through grants and through trying to help support interoperability with our communications, interoperability with our operations, because as you know, on a day-to-day basis, the fire department does fire department stuff, the police department does police department stuff, public works does public works stuff, and everything is merry. It's when we have a bad day and we all have to come together that logistically that becomes harder and harder to do. And the larger the event, the more difficult that is. So I would say that I've talked to Mr. Iflin, I've talked to some of the other people, and I'm going to try to get an emergency management team of key stakeholders on the response side together so that we can meet at some regular intervals so that those relationships are there, that communication chain is there, and we're more comfortable working with one another when there's not a problem, in hopes that we will do an even better job than we do now when there is a problem. Because when you have that bigger issue, those communication chains, the cooperation and collaboration, sometimes those become challenging, especially when we have something that goes outside of the city, where we have something that maybe affects both the city and the county or one of our other towns, and we need to pull resources from the bigger city of Billings to help. Maybe we need to help Laurel or outside the county like we do on some of these major wildfires. So that's kind of my spiel. I wanted to keep it quick because I was asked to keep it quick. So
That's great. Thank you, Casey. Great job. I'm sure we'll have some questions. I know one of mine is, tell us a little bit about the connection between you and your office and the city. Specifically, what's the funding connection? What's the management connection? Who's your boss? I know you've talked in the past about getting help also in your office. There's only one of you. So could you, and then you've also said that you'd like to be integrated more and better with the city and city administration and our departments. How's that coming and all those topics, but generally, how do you connect with the city?
So my paycheck says Yellowstone County at the top of it. By resolution, I'm the DES coordinator for the city of Billings, the city of Laurel, the town of Broadview, and the county. So I am your DES coordinator. I am paid by Yellowstone County. One of the challenges there is that while political subdivisions have the imaginary lines and the boundaries, emergency management does not. So I don't recognize, unless there's some type of a legal thing, I don't care whether I'm in the city, whether I'm in Laurel, whether I'm out in the county, I still need the cooperation, and I'm still trying to get the assets and resources. I'm responsible for every square inch and every human being in Yellowstone County. So the relationship to the city is sometime in the past, I don't know when, the city adopted Yellowstone County DES as the DES coordinator for the city. Statewide, that really works to your advantage because some of the grants, the state recognizes the county and not the city. So EMPG being the big one, the Emergency Management Performance Grant, counties can apply for those, but individual cities in Montana don't. And we have, as a good thing, one emergency operations plan, one hazard plan, and we have one plan that covers all of the jurisdictions for each thing, whether it's wildfire, emergency operations, continuity of operations, all of those type of things is one. Funding is currently all county. So the county foots the bill. I think there's some cooperation. The city owns what we call the Emergency Operations Center. And then the county also pays for some 911 service, which is loosely connected to DES, but DES in general is pretty much 100% funded by the county. And then you ask who my boss is. Well, for the city of Billings, you are. Y'all are my boss. From the people who sign my check, it would be the commissioners. And when I'm dealing with the city of Laurel, it would be the mayor and the city council of Laurel, and the same with Broadview. So I don't know how that sits with everybody, but you guys are my boss. I am I'm a department of the city by default. But like I said, sometimes on a day-to-day basis, I don't really recognize those imaginary boundaries. I kind of work for all of Yellowstone County. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions, Councilmember Purinton, Ronning, and Boyette?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, actually. And I have asked you this before with regard to the railroad and the refineries, because I know they have their own system of handling fires or spills or whatever. So are you kind of their backup, or does it depend where it happens? What are those dynamics?
That's an interesting dynamic. So inside the city limits of Billings, if there is an issue with one of the refineries or the railroad or something like that, the initial response is Billings Fire Department and Billings Hazmat Team. There is an agreement between the refinery and the Billings Hazmat Team that they work together. They do have emergency response capabilities out at the refinery. They're quite sophisticated. They're very good, but they do work together. So anything that's solely contained on the property of the refinery would prefer to deal with that themselves. If that spills over the boundary, and when I say that, I don't mean, it doesn't have to be a solid, and a gas. So as soon as that gas or that odor or that chemical goes off of their property, it becomes our problem. Now, I'm not the head of the hazmat team. I am the responsible party to report and keep up with all of the hazmat things that happen in the county. That's part of what DES does. That's the reason you also have an LEPC. They're the hazmat regulation oversight people. That's what LEPC was originally designed for. So I'm responsible to make sure that the hazmat scene gets handled properly within local and state guidelines. But the people who do the work would be your hazmat team for the city of Billings. And then with the railroad, almost always you will have Billings Hazmat Team and Billings Fire Department respond first, and it will take a while for the railroad team to get here. My job in that is to make sure that that coordination happens. All of the resources that they need get ordered. The financial paperwork for everything gets taken care of, and all of the regulatory documentation gets done.
So one follow-up. You mentioned, I think it was number 2 on your list were the wildfires. So I don't remember, we've been here quite a few years, I don't remember a fire that has been close enough to the city that it was causing some danger. So I'm wondering, and this might be something for Wyeth, I don't know, but in city county, are there regulations that, especially in the county, because they're on those larger acreages, that they have to use those mitigation requirements? And do they have to have them within the city that mitigate fires coming up to the homes? I know they do it out,
Right.
out in the rural areas, but are they required to do any of that in city county?
It depends on the rules of the city and the rules of the county. There's not a law that says, there's not like a state law that says you can't have brush 20 feet tall growing all the way up to your building with trash everywhere. So we pick mitigation efforts and we promote mitigation efforts and we get grants, and we've been doing some significant mitigation work through a grant through the DNRC out at Emerald Hills, for example. Same thing with the city. There's zoning laws and there's rules from living in the city that restrict certain things that have a mitigation effect, but there's not really a sound, you have to do fuel mitigation around your house. Those are projects that I guess the city council could say, we're going to have everybody do that. But to my knowledge, there's not. Kevin, do you know? I don't think there is a rule that says you have to. But we recognize, and Billings Fire Department is real good about this, and your zoning people are real good about trying to limit that when you have a development or come up. They do go out and look at it and say, that's dangerous, this is not. But it is something certainly that we should work on, where we should be a fire-wise community, but that takes a lot of effort and paperwork and things to do that. So those mitigation efforts are as much as I can come up with to get done. And it all takes money.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Running, and then Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you. Thanks, Casey. Great presentation. So my question is along the same lines in regard to the hazardous material. So you mentioned Billings Hazmat Team and you mentioned the Billings Fire Department. First question is, who's the primary response team for if there was a hazardous material emergency off of the refineries or the railroad property? So who is the
Billings Fire.
Billings Fire Department?
Billings Fire Hazmat Team. Billings Fire Department has a hazmat team, and Billings Fire Department hosts the regional hazmat team.
Okay, so that was basically going to be my question. Who makes up that regional hazmat team, and who makes up the Billings hazmat team?
To the best of my knowledge, they're the same people. Yeah, they're the same people. So the regional portion of the hazmat team is, they've agreed to be a regional hazmat team. They can be deployed even outside the county if necessary, and there's funding that comes from the state every year to help promote and keep the resources, training, tools, stuff for that regional hazmat team. But they do have to keep the regional hazmat things separate from the city hazmat stuff, and there's rules on deployment.
Is that made up 100% of the Billings Fire Department?
I did not hear you.
So, okay, so it's not 100% the Billings Fire Department. Who else makes up that hazmat team?
And excuse me, Councilman, I thought you were talking about, does the entire fire department participate? No, but it is made up of strictly the Billings Fire Department, I believe, yes.
Yeah, that's what I
Billings Fire
thought.
Department employees make up all of the employees for both teams.
Okay, that's what I thought. All right, thank you.
Councilmember Boyette,
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Neese, and Yakwich.
Over the last many years, I participated in two tests. One was at the airport where we pretended an airplane crashed and what happened to the city then. The other was at the post office where a letter was opened and what happens to the employees. Do you do any testing anymore? Should that be something we do regularly, or should the city participate?
Actually, we've had more exercises than, as far as I can tell, the state tells me, than anybody in the state. And I'm required to have at a minimum 3. and I think we're at 9 for the last year. So after I turned in my 6th or 7th one, they just said, you don't have to turn the record in anymore. But yes, sir, we do those, whether they're tabletop exercises all the way up to full-scale exercises, very regularly, whether it's with the college, the airport, the oil refineries. We've done those with the oil refineries. Some of them are virtual, some of them are real, but they're the hospitals. Those happen on a very, very regular basis.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation and the information and all you do. A couple things I want to ask you about is the first is, I think, the SF8, the health thing. Is that still active with your department or under you, or is that just turned over to county health department now and they're kind of handling it?
So you're just talking about COVID specifically?
Well, the pandemic.
All right, so the pandemic is primarily now handled through the health department, Riverstone Health, and the
Okay.
2 hospitals. I think it's a couple of weeks ago, time kind of mixes up a little bit. We stopped having the Unified Health Command
Okay,
meetings.
that's what I want to know. So
Right.
you guys no longer meet about that?
The Unified Health Command is no longer meeting on a regular basis about that. But the hospitals in Riverstone still
Okay,
do.
great,
Yes, sir.
thanks. And then my second question, Mayor, if you don't mind.
Please.
Code Red. We've, of course, don't have the sirens anymore. We had a severe thunderstorm the other day. My phone went off, which was good. A couple others around me did go off. Do you know what the percentage is yet of the total residents who have the Code Red? Because I'm afraid that
We have like
there's a lot of people there.
16,000 phone, so
So that's not very,
there's
it's
like
16,000.
16,000 phone numbers
Yeah,
that are actively registered. So no, we do not have near the number of people that need to be registered on Code Red registered. And I would still encourage every citizen to do it. I mean, across Montana, we have, half of the counties in Montana use Code Red. So even as you go out and do your activities throughout the state, it would behoove you to have the Code Red because you would get messages from them if you were in an emergency situation when you were traveling. So I would strongly encourage everybody to do that. The National Weather Service sends out the weather alerts for us, so we don't have to do that, which is great. And you can pick and choose which weather alerts you want to be notified of.
but, and I understand, I think Code Red is a great program, and I've got it. In fact, if you say 16,000, I've got 3 numbers, so I've registered all 3 numbers, so it's probably less individuals that are being notified than actual what you have. And my concern is, how do we get our citizens to register more? I mean, what have other communities done to get their citizens registered? What do they expect to have registered? Because when there's severe weather, people are not going to know about it until it hits them. When that ditch breached, I don't know how many, you sent out the notice about that, but how many people actually were notified and actually got the notice that something was happening then?
I can get those exact numbers, but it was less than 60% of the number of households that were in the polygon that we drew. Because that's just how many people have actual Code Red. So what we've done here is as much as we can, the advertising, we've been on when I first got here, there was a big media blitz on getting hooked up and that. I think our biggest opportunity is School District 2. We've been building community groups for them, so when the school opens again, August, I guess, is when we go back to school, there'll be community groups so that the faculty, the parents and all, they're gonna use that as an emergency deal. So there's an opportunity, and we'll have another media blitz and another flyers that go out to all of the people who are affiliated with Billings School District 2. So hopefully that will make a big impact. The other thing is the more people have it, the more other people seem to want to get it. And as it turns out, thank goodness, we don't really have to send out a lot of alerts. We did an evacuation order Friday, I think, for the fire that we had around Huntley. That went to 1 square mile, and I think we got 20 some odd recipients of that message. So it is something that we need to continue to work on and continue. And I tell it every time I get on media, I try to get anybody to use it.
That's one of the reasons I brought it up, because I think we need to get more people on that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilor Yakovich.
Thank you, Honor and Council. Good presentation. Mr. Iflin, I like these kind of presentations that just seem to get a lot of traction. I was honored to see you on the peripheral with the ditch. I worked a little bit with the Red Cross, and seeing the mayor and others there and what you were doing was very impressive. I guess my question would be, there was a slide that said public information, not necessarily officer, but you were, I guess I'm just curious, we have the opportunity for you to be able to speak on these issues to the public.
Yes.
And it's very reassuring, and it's something that council has talked about, having that kind of public information officer. Do you feel, I don't want, it's not a loaded question, just curious, and you can maybe even answer later, but how do you feel empowered to do that? Are you able to do that? Are you seeking support from the council to do that? I'm just curious where you're at with that, and you have, what, 13 issues that could come up?
That's a really, really good question. So a public information, or a trained and good public information officer can do wonders for the city, for the county, wherever they're giving the message. The public information officer, and if you ever follow some of these major fires where they have public information officers that are feeding information they're not just feeding that information to the elected officials and the councils, but it's to the city and to the firefighters and to everybody. But a good public information officer really can have a very positive effect on the outcome and helping people get the information that they need so that they can make the decisions that we really need them to make for public safety. But it goes further than that. The city should have a public information officer that doesn't only talk about emergencies and fires, but there's a lot of things that happen in the city that it would be nice if the public was on a very regular and consistent basis. Hey, public, this is what we're doing. Hey, council, this is what we're doing. Or when you get those media calls, which I get all of the time, it would be wonderful. When I get the information from the PIO at those wildland fires, when the media calls me and says what's going on, I have a really good script, and we're saying a consistent message, a factual message, and generally a very concise and well-written message. When you rely on me to be the public information officer, I don't have the time generally. The bigger the event, the less time I have to really sit down and formulate a good, solid message. Plus, I'm thinking about other stuff. So while I can do it, and I have done it, probably not the 100% best candidate for it, but it's a good public information officer is a critical piece of our puzzle that we're missing at all the county, the city, everywhere. I would highly encourage us to get one. It doesn't have to be somebody who does it just for a city or just for a county, or maybe we have 10, I don't know. But every refinery has one, the railroad has one, Walmart has one, for goodness sakes. I mean, it's just really good business to do that. While I'm on the subject, can I bring up one more thing?
Sure, then we'll go to public comment for anybody who would like to chime in on
The other
this.
thing that we're missing here, that we're lacking sorely, is an emergency operations center. We do emergency operations out of my truck or somewhere that we kind of makeshift do. What we consider the emergency operations center that we have now, you can kind of get 8 people in a room. There's no technology. There's no way to transmit information. And the emergency operations center is the hub for the city administrator, the mayor, the public works director, the Chief St. John, Chief Valdez, and all the other key stakeholders to come together to make the overarching and overriding decisions on a major issue, and we just don't have that. And as the largest population center in the state of Montana, when we have a much larger event, that will be a limiting factor in our ability to respond to it.
Thank you, Casey. It sounds like we need, or the county needs to get you a bigger truck.
One that can hold about 60 people.
Yeah, okay. Councilor Tariki and anybody else in the council will try to get to public comment.
Yeah, thanks. Casey, I was actually going to ask you about that. Obviously, it wasn't a surprise that that was one of the recommendations in the CPSM fire report. So do we have a plan? Are we at least, thinking about what it would look like and how we could get there?
I do.
What do we have to do to take it beyond just you then?
Well, we need to sit down as a community, and it's not just Billings or just the county or just Laurel or just Broadview. We need to sit down because the Emergency Operations Center is for all Yellowstone County citizens. And as a group, we need to come up together and say, hey, what are the needs here? And bring the fire department, the police department, city administration, and everybody at the table and say, what do we need? And then how are we going to do it? There's 2 or 3 places that, did you buy the Stillwater building or did you not buy it?
We have it under contract, so theoretically speaking, how would a slightly used federal courthouse work?
There's space there. There's space at the round building that used to be the sheriff's office building. There's places, or there's dirt where you can actually build one. But it is very critical, and as far as having a plan, I look back at the records all the way back into the 70s, and it has been a recommendation since around 1980. So it's been talked about for years. It's been a bullet point on after action reports for years. But it is time that we move on something. But as far as a formal blueprint, no.
I'm happy to help you do anything we can to get some movement on that.
Thank you. Anything else before we go to public comment, council? We can wrap up later too. Thank you, Casey. You can take a seat, but don't go away. We'll, in case something else comes up. This is an opportunity for the public to weigh in on what you've heard on our emergency preparedness topic. If you'd like to be heard, please come forward to the microphone. Keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Tell us your name and your address, please. Is there anybody who would like to comment on item number 2? Any public comment? Not seeing any, so we will close. Council, anything on item number 2 before we move on to item number 3? Not seeing any. Casey, thank you, and have a good drive. Thank you very much. Council, it's 7:07, so we've got about 23 plus 25 minutes for our usual break point. We'll see how it goes, but let's make what progress we can. Laura.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Yes, we're excited tonight to bring before you the feasibility study for looking at the Fifth Avenue corridor. This has been talked about for many, many years in the downtown. And to look at that corridor that we have railroad right-of-way and where the street wasn't actually built. But it's an opportunity for the community, especially with the work that's being done in the eBird, with the Metro Park doing their master plan, with the downtown. We're always looking for ways to expand that and grow the downtown. What an opportunity for this corridor to maybe be that link between the Metro and the Y. There's some great opportunities there. This is coming from the MPO. This was in our 2021 UPWP, our work program. So this is being heard by you, Planning Board, County Commissioners, and ultimately to the PCC in August. So I'm going to stop talking and let Michael Sanderson of Sanderson Stewart present this to you. We're very fortunate to have Michael leading this charge for us. And we have a very good start and some great information. Again, this was a feasibility study. There's no programmed projects or anything like that. It was just to see what we could do with this area. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michael.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to just giving you an overview of the work we've done here over about the last year on this project. A lot of groundwork that we did, and I know the information is in your packet, so I won't go into all the details, but hopefully give you an overview and then give you an opportunity to ask some questions. So we'll go to the next slide there. Just to kind of frame what the scope of the project was, both in area and in intent. As Laura said, this is a feasibility study. So the intent of this was not to come up with a design or a specific plan of what we're going to build, but to evaluate whether it was feasible to do something on this corridor and what that might look like. And so the extents of the project physically were from Main Street on the east end to Division on the west end, essentially running parallel to the railroad tracks, what we call the Fifth Avenue corridor. As you all know, there is no Fifth Avenue, but it is on the alignment of what would be Fifth Avenue. We also, if you see the red outline that goes to the south, included the spur that connects this rail line to the main line along Montana Avenue. So that was also part of the study area. So our overall purpose was to look at what are the opportunities to develop transportation connections. This was funded with federal transportation dollars, so at its core it was a transportation plan, but transportation and land use are joined at the hip, and so you can't really study the transportation opportunities without looking at the adjoining land uses, and so that was a big part of the project as well. You'll see in the initial statement there that we were envisioning this as a non-traditional motorized and non-motorized corridor. It's kind of a mouthful, but non-traditional motorized are everything from scooters to trolley cars to all sorts of things that were thrown out as ideas, but basically not cars. So we looked at pretty much everything, but the intent of it not to become another street, but something more non-traditional in terms of biking and walking and other opportunities. And so we really looked, one of our key goals out of this was to have broad community involvement, very diverse constituency from a very industrial area at one end to the central business district in the other. It comes very near the North Park neighborhood. There's quite a variety of constituents along this corridor potentially connected to it. We did have to develop some vision for what might be there, although, like I say, an ultimate design was not part of this. And then to develop some implementation priorities or phasing ideas for how this might move forward. So the process was basically broken down here into 5 segments. It started with a pretty extensive site analysis looking at existing right-of-way, survey and field work on all the adjoining intersections, land use and zoning and everything else. It included a walking tour with our steering committee of the entire corridor. We actually walked the entire corridor with our steering committee or our oversight committee. Stakeholder meetings. We had 5 what I would call kind of focus group meetings with groups, each with a focus of their own. One was the owners and representatives from properties in the central business district area. We had one with specifically owners adjacent to the corridor in the eBird. We also met specifically with the Bird Board of Directors. We had one focus group meeting that was specifically looking at public safety and homelessness. We had representatives from numerous social service organizations. We actually invited, through the help of St. Vincent de Paul, 2 homeless gentlemen who came to the meeting and talked to us about what it's like living on the street. The downtown resource officers and a variety of people focused on those issues. Active transportation, representatives from various groups that are looking to expand active transportation in the community, and then numerous meetings with Montana Rail Link. So Montana Rail Link, the railroad right-of-way in this corridor is owned by BNSF, but it's operated under lease to Montana Rail Link, and so Montana Rail Link is really the one in control of the corridor. And so we had numerous meetings with them as well. We had a couple of open houses. This whole process was mostly done through the pandemic. And so one of the reasons to do the smaller focus group meetings, as many as we did, as well as many individual landowner meetings, was that we were able to do those in person. And so most all of those meetings were in person. The larger open house we did was, we ended up having to do as a virtual open house. And we had, 30-some responses online. We really don't know how many people maybe, viewed the information without responding in any way. But we feel like we did significant outreach one-on-one and in small groups in person with groups throughout the corridor. So that we took all that information, then we had to do some level of starting to assess the feasibility. I'll talk about what those criteria looked like and how we evaluated that, and then ultimately some development of the vision. This entire process was overseen by a project oversight committee that included city staff, Montana Department of Transportation, representatives from the Bird, downtown Billings, Big Sky Economic Development, and Yellowstone County. So the corridor conditions, you're probably all fairly familiar with it, but it's pretty diverse from a heavily used industrial area on the one end to, there's kind of a transition area in the middle, but then on the west end it is a very well-developed part of the central business district, parking lots. There's a parking garage that straddles the corridor at the other end, and you kind of have to use your imagination to see where the corridor winds its way through the Trans-Western area to what we considered the terminus of it to be is the YMCA. So we started the process asking the stakeholders and the public, we kind of had to ask the question, what if? To get people thinking about what if this corridor could be something other than what you see there today. And these are just 3 images of many that we use to kind of show what's been done along railroad corridors in other communities. The one on the left there is Montana Rail Link Park in Missoula, so actually along a Montana Rail Link facility. But lots of examples just to kind of get people thinking of what might be possible alongside a railroad. And I say that because when we started this, there was some discussion of, well, if the railroad goes away and we can take over the entire corridor. One of the things that's important to know that we learned here is Montana Rail Link, as of today, I think serves 2 or 3 customers who are actively ordering rail service. It actually changed a couple times just throughout the duration of the project. And what it's important to know is that when the railroads were deregulated, the railroad is required under federal law to serve customers along that line as long as they want service. And so we can't really just abandon the railroad, even if we wanted to. And so we realized that at least for the foreseeable future, we have to assume that there's an active rail spur there. And so we kind of shifted our focus to what is possible, assuming that the railroad will continue to be there. And so that's why we're looking at examples of things that we could do alongside an active rail line in that part of the corridor. So key takeaways from this process so far were, there are significant opportunities to create connections to some important areas, important neighborhoods, important destinations from metro to downtown. It winds past some fairly significant institutions in this city. And so opportunity to do that, to dedicate a corridor primarily to bicycles and pedestrians, to build off our railroad history. That's something that came out of this process. Another one of your adopted plans, the bike and trail master plan, the concept of the heritage trail, where throughout the city we've added interpretive components to the trail system. We feel like this is an opportunity to really celebrate the railroad history in downtown. Montana Rail Link is open to continuing the conversation. We said it that way because they didn't say no. And, at this point in time, without a more well-developed plan, they are obviously going to reserve judgment on what they would approve until we would get to that next stage. But at this point, open to the feasibility of a project such as this. And they were very receptive to the conversations. That was an encouraging takeaway. So anyway, lots of opportunities also to connect private investment of adjacent properties. The eBird master plan is very much about redevelopment and encouraging redevelopment. And so as we talk to owners who have already started to redevelop properties, they saw this as an opportunity to enhance the value. Certainly there's concerns, safety being one of them. How do we deal with pedestrian safety at a lot of intersections along the corridor, as well as some of the public safety issues that I mentioned earlier. 27th Street being the largest of the intersection issues. One of the things we did through this process when we started, we were often referring to the crossing at 27th Street as a mid-block crossing. But we kind of forced ourselves to change our language at that point because it became clear Fifth Avenue is not mid-block. It's precisely one block between 4th to 5th to 6th. And we have traffic signals at every one of those one block spacings throughout downtown. And we believe that this is an opportunity to have a fully signalized crossing at 5th that would be safe, but also kind of celebrate and make this corridor very visible. Montana Department of Transportation was on our steering committee. They like Montana Rail Link, I think, have reserved judgment on what the final design of that crossing might look like, but agree that, one block spacing is what we have. It's not a big block crossing. So let's move along here. So how do you assess feasibility of a project where we don't really have a design? We looked at, what would make this feasible to move forward. And some of these are more, I would say, qualitative than quantitative criteria. So, one is to move forward, we would need to have full support of the railroad at some point in time. At this point, we have what we call qualified support. They've said they would need to review a more complete design to give that approval. But at this point, we have as much railroad support, I think, as we can expect. Property owner agreement and support. That's why we did a significant amount of one-on-one and small group stakeholder meetings. And we have, we received considerable encouragement from many of the property owners. Right-of-way availability. Some of this can be done on the railroad right-of-way as far as building a trail or whatnot with easements. In other places, we would need to potentially acquire additional right-of-way or acquire it when adjacent properties develop, much the way we do with other trails and streets. But that's one more reason why it's important to have a plan, I think, so that when those opportunities come up, you have to be prepared to move quickly. Public support is important. At some point in time, it's going to come back to you, and there will be dollars involved, and you're gonna need the public support to move forward. Safety, that was one thing we heard over and over again. This needs, for people to use this, it needs to be safe. Cost, you know, the cost is important to the feasibility. There's a cost estimate in here at, you know, $5 to $6 million. Take that for what it's worth. This is that's a 30,000 foot. You know, we had to come up with some estimate of what the value might be, and so we had to assume a multi-use path, some amenities, a few intersection improvements and things. But that's by no means a commitment of what you might expect to spend. That's, you know, we get to another phase where we develop that plan, we would have to come back to you with more concrete dollars. And then we think it's incredibly important that there be a phasing, that this be a project be able to be phased over time for it to be feasible, because of the fact that, you know, one end of the corridor is going to be an industrial area for a long time. There's other parts of the corridor that you could potentially do something right now. There's other areas where you might need to be opportunistic if an area began to redevelop. And so having the opportunity to do pieces and phases as those opportunities come up is really important. So overall, the goals that the Oversight Committee came up with for the vision was, we need something that will connect the community through downtown and connect the eBird to downtown and to Metro Park. Create a transformational, inviting public space. And so we talk about placemaking in here, and as I said, this is a transportation plan, not a land use plan, but the only way a transportation corridor can be successful is people have to have somewhere to go from and to. You need origins and destinations, otherwise nobody's going to use it as a transportation corridor, and it needs to be an inviting, safe public space. And so a transformation of the space is very much you know, part and parcel to the success of it as a transportation corridor. It needs to be visible, things like a significant crossing at 27th Street and other things like that to make it visible so that people see it. It needs to be visible in the sense that it needs to be lit and those types of things to make it safe. And there's lots of opportunities to leverage community partnerships here. It bridges two TIF districts. You've got the Bird Board and downtown and all sorts of groups that are to leverage to make this thing happen. And so I'm going to go to several slides here that break this down into smaller chunks, but we really looked at this in 4 segments. So starting on the west end, what we called the linear park, and so we'll just go to that. So the linear park stretch is what we named the piece from the YMCA to the Yellowstone Art Museum. So really the piece through the Central Business District. It connects some very significant institutions from the Lincoln Center and the library, the Transwestern business area, with the art museum, both the museum and the museum's visible vault across the street. Really kind of creates an area that's already developed, and there's an opportunity to develop a linear park through that area to really kind of enhance and create some interesting public spaces. The art museum director was at our One Focus Group meeting and is very excited about the opportunities to do some public open space around the museum. And so that's one stretch through an already well-developed area. The right-of-way through that stretch doesn't really exist, so that is an area where you'd have to work with adjacent property owners to develop. So then you move into this section we call the Y junction. And Y junction is a railroad term for that type of switch that looks like a Y. But it's also very much a crossroads of this corridor, because this is where we can create that north-south connection from Montana Avenue to North Park. It's the area where we have the most existing railroad right-of-way. And it's also an opportunity to create one of these kind of activity nodes between the GSA office building and First Interstate Bank Operations Center. So we've already started to have some redevelopment there. There's hundreds of employees that work there every day already. And the opportunity to create some sort of activity node there that we could then connect back to downtown, kind of a, connect the dots idea here, where you've got areas of activity connected by a walking and biking path. Going to the south from this area is that spur that connects down to Montana Avenue. There's very little existing railroad right-of-way on that spur. And so as long as it's active, we don't really think it's probably feasible to build a trail or a path or anything along that. And so the alternative in the short term would be to do some sort of on-street route, which is the blue line there down 20th, which in the eBird master plan is identified as a main street. And so kind of playing off the eBird master plan, we see as opportunity to do something on-street, until which time that railroad goes away sometime in the future, whenever that might be. The next segment we call the rail trail. It's really probably the simplest part, because at this point in time, there's enough right-of-way to do a multi-use path along the railroad, but those properties have largely not redeveloped at this point in time, so it's probably pretty much just a multi-use path connecting through this area. But there's a lot of opportunity then, as those properties might redevelop in the future, to connect to this trail. And then the last segment is what we call the Gateway Hub. And the reason we call it that is in the eBird master plan, this area was called the Recycling Hub because of all the recycling facilities that are in that area and still exist there. It's got some really narrow right-of-way through there, and it's the most heavily used industrial area. And so we feel like it's probably not feasible to develop that part of the corridor at this time until those recycling facilities might go away in the future. And if they even never do, there's still an opportunity to develop an on-street route down 13th and along 3rd to Main Street or Exposition. And what we've shown there is that's the location in another city plan, the Gateway Corridor study that identified that as the location for an overpass to Metro Park. And so we could connect this to Metro Park on the east end. So lots of opportunities. We think the kind of core of it is a multi-use path of some sort with other types of enhancements. These are just some ideas that we showed people for what that might look like. And there's significant placemaking opportunities. And one of the things that came out of this was this idea of celebrating the railroad history and creating some unique places in Billings that celebrate that. And so these were just some ideas of places around the country that had done that through the design of the facility. And even though there's kind of 4 unique segments, through wayfinding, design, and design elements, we think it's important that there be consistent design elements so that even though the character of the neighborhood is changing, it feels like one corridor from one end to the other, and you could do that through good design. So what's next? This is the last slide. This is a feasibility study to really move to that next step, to start to get more commitment from Montana Rail Link and adjacent owners to get to a more robust cost estimate of costs, so you could start to identify specific funding sources. It really is going to that kind of 30% or concept design phase, which would allow us to go to start to really identify what the funding opportunities are, followed by identifying what maybe that first pilot project is, and then you could take that project or projects to that 100% design. And so that's kind of where we're at. Anything else? Questions?
Thank you very much. Michael, it's 7:35. We typically take a break around 7:30. Why don't we do that? Then we'll come back, rather than breaking up questions. I'm sure there'll be plenty. So let's try to make it as close to 5 minutes and come back as close to 7:40 as we can.
Great.
Questions by council and then public comment. We'll ask if there's any other staff presentation. I believe that there is. Anything else on your part, Michael?
Nope.
Okay.
Just if there were any questions.
So do you want to introduce Rusty and his role, or he can do it himself? Talk for himself.
Explain himself.
All right, Mayor, Council, good evening. I just wanted to speak, Met Transit was involved pretty significantly in the study, especially in the Steering and Oversight Committee. And I just wanted to take a minute to focus on the opportunity that this study does present to, the community of Billings overall. Downtown, we continually look for opportunities to rehabilitate and grow the downtown area, make it more attractive area of activity and placemaking. The areas that this study focuses on, obviously it's not just the Fifth Avenue corridor that we're talking about, but the overall area that surrounds it as well, because as we grow these areas, it gives an opportunity, especially from the transit standpoint, to address some of the concerns that we've heard over on the Met Transit side of things as far as frequency and service goes. Right now, the downtown area is so focused in the 27th Street corridor, the medical corridor there, that expanding in these different areas and expanding that downtown area out really do give us the opportunity to justify more expanded and frequent service in that area to fill in the gaps that we have between Metro Park and the downtown area, especially focusing on the node type of development that Michael did identify in here. It just lends itself better to a transit network that actually, instead of just connecting between, Metro Park and downtown, that lends itself to placemaking in between as well. So I just wanted to let you guys know that I am available here if any of those trans-related questions do come up, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll open up for questions by council of Michael, Laura, Rusty. Questions, Councilmember Ronnie?
It's for you, Michael. Thank you. This is just so exciting for me. I remember in 2018, I went for a walk with Tim Goodridge, and I think it would have been maybe the rail trail portion. And we talked about just exactly what you presented here and the possibility of that happening. But one of the things that I talked about at the time with Tim, and that I would hope, and I love the phasing and see this as a phasing part of that. But one of the things I would hope that would happen in the future, and I don't know if this was ever a discussion, but is there a potential for future direction of being able to connect the Heights to this corridor, as well as like the Heights to Colson Park, but being able to get people from the Heights through different mobilities other than a car?
So that may be a good one for Laura, but I think beyond the scope of this, and I think it gets into the bike and trail master plan, which does show those connections and, connecting to this corridor from those other areas, but it's probably covered in a different plan.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor, Councilperson Ronning. Yes, in our transportation plan and even in the city CIP, there's been discussion about altering and reconstructing the 6th corridor as it comes down from the Heights with a multi-use trail. That trail will actually be able to connect then to like 13th and those areas where there is an existing stoplight. So that would get you down into the corridor, and then you have the opportunity to catch the 5th corridor as a transportation corridor for bike or pedestrian, or as Rusty said, those opportunities to get down maybe to the bus system. So I think it does, ultimately, when we get all those connections done, and we hear it all the time, we need to make those connections, make our network fully realized. And these little pieces, they may seem like a little piece, but they are such a big piece of the whole puzzle.
Yeah.
So I think we'll see a lot of that connectivity when we get the 6th piece done.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Great presentation.
Thank you. Other questions by council members? Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is for Mr. Sanderson. I know that I was looking at your assessment of feasibility criteria and everything. I love this plan. This is wonderful, great. And I went on a bus tour, and we drove around and talked about this possibility. I guess it's not a question you may not be able to answer, but do you think we would get to that point where the railroad would really sign off on it? Because the issues of property owner agreement and support, I mean, this is the right of way. You're talking about a lot of very specific requirements in order to make it work. Do you think we could get to that point where the railroad would say, sign off on it and be supportive of it? Thank you.
Yeah, yes, I do. In certain segments where we have the right-of-way width, I mean, they will have certain requirements in terms of a minimum spacing away from the tracks to anywhere you would have pedestrians. As you see in this rendering we did, there's actually a physical barrier. There's a fairly substantial fence there. I think that's an expectation they would have, that there would be a physical separation between any path we would design there and the railroad itself. But we believe that those are all possible through design to get to something that they would sign off on. So they will certainly have expectations and requirements before they would do that, but we believe it's possible to get there.
Thank you. Councilmember Purington and Neese?
Thank you. Michael, one of the questions I had asked Laura earlier today was, you had mentioned the public-private partnerships. And so with some of these stakeholders that were gearing towards the direction of approval of this, of liking this, did any of them step up and say, we want to be a part of this?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but in this rendering, for instance, you know, the GSA office building is actually a privately owned building, right? And it was built by a developer and is leased back to the federal government. We met with them, and they were one that specifically said, you know, we want to, the reason they invested in that area in the first place was they wanted to see the area redevelop. Hasn't developed the way they would have hoped. They see this as a catalyst to hopefully redevelop some other properties in the area, and said, you know, this is something that we would want to be a part of. Now, obviously, we don't have dollars to talk about, so, you know, how far that commitment goes, obviously, I can't speak for them. But, and that wasn't the only conversation we had with people who said, you know, this is something that we would want to participate in.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, the Fifth Street corridor is really something that I've thought would really be a really nice addition to the city. And so I'm glad you're able to study this, but 2, maybe 3 times during the study, and we did this study, a feasibility study, to see if it was feasible, and you said it wasn't in several of the sections. So it appears to me, maybe you can clarify what you're saying, because when you told me, when you said this section wouldn't be feasible, it would be years maybe before anything like that would be feasible. Can you kind of elaborate on, you know, when you say it's not feasible in
yeah,
sections?
so specifically, and maybe that's not the right terminology, it's more about when, not if. You know, I think the whole thing is feasible depending on timing. There are a couple of stretches, primarily at the east end in the recycling area, and then on the spur down to Montana Avenue, where the right-of-way is very, very narrow. And so building that physical separation that I said, you know, would be a requirement, would make it so that at least in the short term, you probably wouldn't be able to build a trail. Now, does that mean that someday when that railroad goes away, if it does, that could be, if all the users went away and those properties redeveloped, that could be in the next 10 years, it could be 50 years. So, you know, is it feasible? Ultimately, I think the entire corridor is feasible, yes. But there's a couple of pieces, primarily at that east end, where, you know, you're not gonna build a trail along the railroad at this time.
Thank you, Mayor, Councilman Neese. I think that's one of the reasons that when we looked at the feasibility study, we looked at ways that we could still do that connectivity that may not actually be on the 5th. That's why we incorporated and had Rusty attend so much, because there's opportunities with the 20th Street, Main Street for the eBird, and 13th Street to make those on-street pedestrian and bike facility connections, and then also have Met Transit working its way through there. So you still have some connectivity options that may not be focused right on the 5th corridor right now, but at least it gives you some way through wayfinding and what we're already doing down there with bike lanes and sidewalks to still move people around to get where they need to go.
Thank you, I understand. And if, Mayor, another quick follow-up on that. I guess that was two of the sections where the railroad was, you said was not feasible until the railroad wasn't active, which could, like you said, 10 to 50 years. We don't know. But then you also said on that far west section, none of the right-of-way was available. So it would have to be sought after and then tried to develop, and then it was kind of meandering through some of the buildings that have already built over the old, I guess the railroad must have extended at one point all the way down that way, that they must have sold it off. Mm-hmm. I think when I was here, it was still going across 27th Street over to the Gazette.
I remember it going across 27th when I was a kid.
Right. So, you know, that's the last time I remember crossing 27th Street. But so all of that would have to be reacquired and that. So that's.
So just because the right of way doesn't exist, actually that west end of the corridor is the one area of the corridor that we think is the most feasible in the short term, because of significant interest by the adjoining property owners for something to happen there. And so just because the right of way doesn't exist doesn't mean it's not possible. You know, you have to do it through easements or right of way acquisition. And whether that's purchasing the right of way or the right of way being dedicated, you know, because a property owner wants to participate, you know, there's all sorts of ways to do that. But the interest level in that west end of the corridor was the highest. And so even though that right of way doesn't physically exist out there today, I think that's probably one of the places you would start because of the interest.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you. On that topic, Michael, where there's a will, there's a way, it sounds like, and there's a lot of will, but maybe there's not a lot of time. If a developer wants to develop and they're in the middle of a project, they move very quickly. Somebody wants to sell off a piece of right-of-way or is willing to sell off a piece of right-of-way, they can sometimes need to move quickly. Government doesn't move quickly, and to say, hey, we're going to go pursue federal grants to see if we can find some money, we'll be back to you in 3 or 4 years, that doesn't work. So having a war chest of dollars that could be used on this project at fairly short notice would be great. But what's the feasibility of coming up with those short-term dollars? Where would we look? Do we have to wait until there's a specific need? Would it come from the TIF districts, some federal grant dollars, buying a lot of lottery tickets? I don't know, but what do we, where do we look for short-term money?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I think we have an asset, especially in the eBird with Zach. He is very involved with every redevelopment, every purchase, everything going on down there. He was 100% one of our biggest supporters and assistants in developing this feasibility study. So I think just having that connection with him to know what properties are being looked at, what properties we need to keep a radar on, is it an opportunity to gain an easement through the redevelopment of that property? Is it an opportunity to approach a TIF board to see if they're willing to purchase it? I don't know, but I think there's opportunities there, and I think we have such a good network through the development of the feasibility study that he's our connection. And we have a lot of connection with him and a lot of meeting times with him. So I think if he heard of something, he would be right on the phone to us and say, hey, this is happening. It's an opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Yakowicz.
I'm just trying to wrap my mind around the linear park. So, I mean, we all walk that area a lot. I walk it. So from the YMCA to the museum, you want to put a path. I guess I'm just for the costs of money and all that to do that, I just can't think of somebody walking that, going out of their way to walk that. So could you help me out there?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, Councilman Yakowicz. What we looked at through that area was the opportunity through wayfinding. You know, we adopted a wayfinding sign, plan a couple years ago. And using that wayfinding plan and working with those property owners that have an interest in seeing this develop, you know, I think there's opportunities there. Is it gonna be perfectly aligned with how it's shown here? Maybe not. You might have to take, through wayfinding a couple hundred yards this way, and you meet an interpretive place here, and you might come back. And so it's really about those destinations, especially in this end of the corridor, because between the YAM and the Y, you have so many opportunities there for the connections and even interpretive and a very nice walking area. As you know, it's with the trees and everything, it's probably going to be one of the nicest areas to walk through your destinations.
So
Yep.
I'll just briefly, what we learned meeting with representatives from the Y and Transwestern and Lincoln Center and others is that largely this corridor exists in that people are already walking through there. So people walk to the Y to work out at lunchtime. They eat lunch in the basement of the First Interstate building. There's a lot of walking traffic that kind of follows, so that, you know, walks between Transwestern 1 and 2, walks through that plaza area just right next to the First Interstate and over, cuts across the parking lot to get to Lincoln Center. Like this corridor in concept, people are walking there now. And they said it would be really great if we formalized that into something that looked more like connect the Y across that parking lot to that plaza that's already by First Interstate, and put a sidewalk behind Lincoln Center over across, and, you know, kind of formalize that. And so if you go out there and walk it and use your imagination as you stand there and look across there, you can see how you could actually develop a more formal corridor through there, and it would kind of stair step through and connect all those places. And when we kind of talked about that in that focus group, there was a lot of enthusiasm for it.
Thank you. Other questions for Michael or Laura for public comment? Don't see any, don't go away. In case something else comes up, this is an opportunity for public comment on the Fifth Avenue Corridor feasibility study. If anybody is present here would like to comment, please come forward. Tell us your name, address. Please keep it to 3 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tom Rupsis, 105 Legends Way. I just want to say I was privileged as chair of the Parks Board to participate in one of the stakeholder meetings for this project. And I was just very impressed with the professionalism. And certainly I think the report as it comes out today really demonstrates the possibilities of this park. Personally, for me, it hits three main areas that I'm interested in. Community building through public spaces and placemaking, economic development through the entire East Billings corridor, and then also public safety, because we know when we convert spaces from inactive and vacant to well-designed and programmed, we can actually have a positive impact on crime in the area. But what I really wanted to talk about was Councilmember Roning's comment about connection up to the heights. And thank you for reminding me that 6th Avenue is going to be redesigned to support that as well. What I was really thinking about was, you know, the main focus a lot of times when we're talking about trails and Billings is the Marathon Loop. And it's a circle around the city. But what we're talking about here tonight and recently with the Bike Boulevard connecting from Rose Park all the way down to North Park, and also as the Metro Park conversations go on and talk about improving the frontage along the main road, we would actually be able to get from Rose Park to Wicks Lane along the Bike Boulevard, through this linear park, along the frontage from Metro Park, and then along the Dutcher Trail up to Wicks. And what we're doing there is we're connecting our major residential neighborhoods directly to downtown through alternative means. And it's one of the first times we've heard about this kind of interconnectivity, as opposed to building trails for purely recreational or primarily recreational around the outer edges of the city. So I'd just like to encourage you to accept the plan, recommend it to, for approval to the PCC. I think it's a great plan and it'll do wonders for the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item? Please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Susan Sullivan. I'm at 810 Bluegrass Place. And for 28 years, this has been my stomping ground. I've employed at Transwestern 1, and I'm also a trustee at the Yellowstone Art Museum. Transwestern 1 and that path that they're talking about walking over to the museum. Just to let you know, the museum is actively engaged in this plan in growing the museum's footprint, and to the point that we're fundraising, capital campaign fundraising as one of our first options, tracts of land around the museum that we can continue to, as the museum, can continue to acquire to help incorporate this Fifth Avenue plan. So I'm speaking on behalf of the museum, as well as I've been downtown for 28 years. I'm a financial advisor. And my stomping ground is Transwestern 1 all the way over to the museum every day. So I fully endorse this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item? Please come forward. Any other public comment? Do not see any. So we will close the public comment period on item number 3. Council, anything else before we move to item number 4, recreational and medical marijuana update? Don't see anything. So thank you for our presenters. Appreciate it. It's exciting. And if you could get this done by our next meeting, it would be appreciated. Gina is our presenter. Kevin, anything else before you want to just introduce this one?
Mayor and council, no, I think Gina's going to jump right in here and we'll get started.
Thank you, Kevin. Good evening, Mayor, Council. I really don't have a very long presentation. I just wanted to provide an update following the July 6th work session. At that time, well, and I wasn't here, as you recall, so it's my understanding that Mr. Kukulski advised you all that that would have been the first of 2 discussions. I think based on direction received, direction that you provided to staff at that work session, we'll likely be bringing this back again for at least 1 additional work session. Because as you all know, there was a committee formed and we haven't accomplished what the committee, one of the biggest goals of that committee. So we will have to probably bring this back for 1 more work session. So 3, potentially 4. We'll see how it goes. But just as an update, as you all know, on July 6th, you all directed staff to develop regulations for marijuana businesses while also concurrently preparing a resolution to refer the ballot question to Yellowstone County Election Administrator. So staff did create that committee and we met on a couple of occasions. But given the upcoming deadline to submit the issue, to submit some ballot language to the election administrator, the first of the 2 meetings that we had were solely focused on that. Staff has also met with the county attorney's office to discuss the ballot issue, and we learned that Yellowstone County is preparing to submit the question of whether to prohibit marijuana businesses to the voters. But I think, as you all also know, the county commissioners have not formally voted to do that. They did issue a resolution of intent, and they plan to have a hearing on August 3rd, a public hearing on August 3rd, take public comment, and then vote on whether they intend to submit that question to the voters. If they submit the issue whether to prohibit marijuana businesses to the voters, it's staff's recommendation that it would not be necessary or appropriate to submit an additional question to voters at this time. The ballot question that the county would likely submit would most likely dispose of the city's question. So it's our understanding that the county is planning to ask about marijuana businesses as a whole, which would include all 7 categories of businesses. That's cultivation, manufacturing, transporting, adult use and medical and testing labs. I'm not sure what ones I've missed. So it's our understanding that they're planning to ask about the marijuana businesses as a whole. It's not clear yet whether they're going to ask an additional question to clarify whether medical marijuana will be included as prohibited, or if they're going to try to carve that out. In our discussions with the county attorney's office, they couldn't definitively say, but they thought that the commissioners may want to carve that out. But again, it's too early to say that, so we'll have to wait till the August 3rd hearing to determine what their final ballot language will be, if there is any at all. If the county only asks one question and it is to prohibit all businesses, then like I said before, there's no need for the city to ask a question on the ballot. If the county only asks one question and the voters keep all businesses, then the city will need to pass an ordinance to regulate all business categories and then decide whether to ask a question of the voters at the next election. So there's nothing in the bill which prohibits the city from asking a question on the same ballot as the county, but it would be confusing to the voters to do so, so we don't recommend it. Our question would be, do you want to prohibit adult use dispensaries? And we think that it may be pointless if, as a result of the county question, the voters voted to prohibit all businesses. If the vote results were different in the city and the county, then that may inevitably lead to challenges to both results, the city and the county. So again, we don't recommend that at this point, but certainly are willing to have discussion about that issue. In addition, another, I think, very important point is to the confusion factor that it might pose to the voters is it would take significant educational efforts to advise the voters why there's these 2 questions and what's going on with that. And that would divert educational efforts from the public safety mill levy question, which is on the ballot for sure that we are planning on, and that's been the city's main priority for years. So at this point, we are continuing to work with the county attorney's office on coordinating our efforts, and we are having frequent communications. At this point, I guess actually that's probably the most updated information I can provide. The county, we are still corresponding about this issue, trying to determine exactly how the questions are going to be posed. Our office has submitted some suggestions to them, trying to assist with their ballot language, and haven't heard back yet. So like I said, we're still discussing that. But in any event, we will have time to make a decision about what you all want to submit to the voters on a ballot, if you so choose, as the county commissioners will have a public hearing on the 3rd, and you will have a regular business meeting on August 9th. So we will plan to address this, and we will notice it up and include it on the agenda regardless, and then determine the need for that public hearing following the August 3rd county commissioner meeting. And that's all I have.
Okay,
If there are any questions.
Councilmember Purinton and Ronning and Joy.
So, Gina, with the question still being out there, the committee that was formulated from each of the wards, they haven't met yet. And are they not meeting or not being asked for the input? Because legally speaking, you guys are trying, between the county and the city, you're trying to figure out what you can even do.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Purington, which committee are you referring to that hasn't met?
The one that was formulated on the 6th, was that what it was?
Yes, but it has met, so.
Oh, it has.
Yeah, we've actually met on 2 occasions.
Oh, I thought I
Yeah.
heard you say that you
Oh, I
hadn't met.
apologize.
I thought you meant that it was staff that was meeting. Okay.
Yeah, no, we met with council members, just trying to narrow the issues.
Oh, okay,
and
okay.
focus on the ballot issue, so.
So a follow-up, please. I guess one of the things that, for me personally, with this going on the ballot, is that you made a comment that the city's trying to keep it very simplified because you don't want to confuse the voters because you're having the public safety mill levy ballot issue as well. And so my thing with this is that I think there needs to be just as much education with the marijuana issue. And I don't know if the city is planning on doing anything to, to educate the public, because I think there's a piece of that that really needs to be done. And it can be tied in to me, very succinctly with the public safety mill levy. If either way it goes, I think it ties in just great with the public safety mill levy, if that's what you're trying to do. So to confuse voters, I don't know. I don't know that that's part of, I just don't know that I agree with the confusion part.
I think Councilmember Purington, Mayor and Council, I think if I could clarify, I don't disagree with you. I think the point I was trying to make is if there's 2 questions on the ballot from the county and the city, if there's one question on the ballot from either the county or from the city, I don't think it would be confusing, and the educational efforts that you're talking about could probably be made succinctly and effectively. I just think that if there are 2 questions posed by both the county and the city, the educational efforts to explain that to them, why are there 2 questions? I think that's the part that might cause confusion and would cause us to have to expend additional efforts to clarify what we're doing and why we're doing it.
So we're going to take the county's wording, which you're working with the county on that. So that will be the marijuana issue on that ballot. And then the city on that same ballot will have the public safety mill levy issue. Is that correct?
Yes, if the county does pose a question, that's our big question mark right now, but that's the thought.
Thank you. Councilmember Ronning, enjoy.
Thank you. Gina, I have 2 questions. One is, when you say adult use dispensaries, in regard to the question that the county may be asking, so would the adult use dispensaries, would those cover all of the 7 categories then? Would that terminology cover all 7 categories?
So when I read that question to you, I apologize, Councilmember Ronning, I was referring to, that would be the question that the city posed if we posed a question. What the county intends to do is ask a bigger question, a broader question about all of the 7 categories included in one question. They will simply ask, do you want to prohibit marijuana businesses? And the way that term marijuana businesses is defined by the bill includes all of the 7 categories.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
And just to also clarify, that's the one question that they've included in their resolution of intent. And in discussions with our office, we're discussing and providing some suggestions that they might want to ask a second question just to clarify whether they want medical marijuana to be sort of carved out of that question. Do you, in addition to the above question, do you voters want to prohibit any and all marijuana businesses, including medical marijuana, which would then allow the voters to.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Gina. And then the second question I have is, some of the feedback I've received since this went out in the press that we've been discussing this is it seems as though there's, and this goes back to the educational thing, it seems as though there's a lack of understanding in the public that L190 and what came out of 701, they don't look the same. So what the voters voted on with L190 does not look like what came out of 701. And I think it's challenging for some of the public to understand. They don't understand. Well, they voted on it. Well, that's not what the city has. That what L190 is not what the city has to work with. We have something that looks very, very different. Is there a way to, is the city considering, or do you know if the county's considering doing some sort of educational press release on that, or some type of education on that, so the public understands that these are this is different from what the public voted on?
Well, thank you for the question. Unfortunately, Mayor, Council Member Ronning, I can't answer that question. We didn't have that discussion with the county attorney's office, and that's the only county representatives we met with so far is the county attorney's office. So I'm not sure if they're aware of what kind of educational efforts would be planned, and if they are planning. It seems to make sense to me that type of educational effort would need to be made, because I agree, it is a completely different animal. They added a lot of things, and so it is different. So it seems to me that would be reasonable, makes sense, but I'm not sure what their plan is. And I don't think we've actually developed a plan for educational efforts yet, given we don't know what we're going to do for sure.
Thanks, Gina.
Thank you, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So I have two questions. The first question is, if the county votes to prohibit all types of business, so our question is dispensaries. The county is looking to prohibit all businesses that are related to adult use recreational marijuana. If the county votes, is there any difference in the numbers in the county versus the city? So if the county completely votes no, regardless of whether they're in the city or the county, that settles the question entirely for the city.
Well, it's our interpretation of the bill that the county is required to conduct the election in such a way that separates out the city's vote, so that if the majority of the voters in the municipality were to approve it, then we could then allow that type of business in the city. Well, yeah, that's our interpretation. That's what the statute says, or that's what the bill says, is that the county is required to separate the vote.
Okay, thank you. I just had one other question about the resolution. Whereas, it says, whereas, in order to protect and preserve public safety, health, safety, and welfare, the city of Billings wishes to permanently prohibit the category of adult use marijuana dispensary businesses. How is the city able to educate voters on this particular ballot issue without advocating for a particular vote? So the way the whereas is set up, we are asking them to prohibit this on the basis of public safety. Okay. When we have done public safety mill levy education, we could not say to them, pass this or we're cutting the cops, or any, or don't pass this, we want this. That language really sets us up to say, we are educating you to prohibit this dispensary. So, I'm not clear. You wrote it, so I'm not an attorney. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Joy, and Mayor and Council. I appreciate that critique, because this is a working draft. So I think it would be appropriate we could tweak that language, absolutely, to make it more neutral. It should be neutral. There should not be any advocacy either way, for or against. So I agree, and I think we could definitely tweak that to make it more neutral language.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Joy. I worked on some language there that I would call a little more neutral too, so I'll try to
Great.
send that to you. Going to the confusion issue and the two-question issue, Gina, do we know, I think I know the answer to this, which is probably no, but if in the event you had two questions that are inconsistent with each other, for example, the county has a all-inclusive, do you want to exclude or prohibit marijuana businesses? And the city had a question that was less broad. Do you want to exclude marijuana businesses with the exception of marijuana, medical marijuana, for example? And they both pass. Is there anything clear in HB 701 that says that the city version trumps the county version? That's maybe you can imply it, but in my view of that section 59, that's less than crystal clear. Do you have any comments on which prevails?
I agree, it's less than crystal clear. That is one of the reasons why we would recommend not having the two questions, because I think that would inevitably lead to a challenge to the city, the county, or both. And I think there are definitely arguments to be made that the vote in the municipality would rule in the municipality based on reading the language of that. But again, like you said, it is not crystal clear, and I think that is definitely a landmine that we would like to avoid.
Okay, thank you. Council members, other questions for Gina, Karen, anybody else before we go to public comment? Council member Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. Gina, yeah, this 701 is not clear, and as I've been reading through some of it, I do have a question. This question about legalization can be asked many times. You know, the voters approved 190, and so that's one of some of the emails we're getting is, you know, I think we're trying to overturn that, and we're not. We're trying to just ask the question again. We can ask the question as many times as we want, because times will change, and we may get such a huge majority of voting for it, we're going to find out there's no sense in asking the question. The margins are pretty thin. But is there any limit to the number of times the question can be asked as far as on the electorate?
Council member Neese, I do not see anything in there that limits the amount of time this could be submitted to the voters.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Ewald and Councilmember Purinton.
So, Gina, I don't know if I'm understanding this right. If the county decides to put it on the ballot, they can have a choice of voting in favor or against in the whole county, including the city, or they can exclude the city from it. Is that what I'm understanding?
Council member Ewald, I know I share your frustration. It's very confusing, but the language of the bill specifically says that if an election is held pursuant to this section in a county that contains within its limits a municipality of more than 5,000 persons, then it is not necessary for the municipality to ask for a separate or different vote on the question whether to prohibit a category of marijuana business from being located in the municipality. And in the county shall conduct the election in a way that separates the votes in the municipality from those in the remaining parts of the county. So the county can ask the one question and the votes can be separated, city and county. And if the voters in the city approve, want to continue to allow it or prohibit, then that's what the municipality will need to allow or prohibit. The voters in the county can vote a different way. And because the vote is separated, it's essentially like two elections in one. I mean, but it's just one, taking one vote, and you can separate it out to determine what the city wants to do and what the county wants to do. I don't know if that helped or just made it worse, but.
That just made it more confusing, I think. So, if this county puts it on that way, then the city, we have to accept whatever happens, because there'll be a positive vote prohibiting or accepting it at the same time as the county's doing the same process. Or the county can just go on and prohibit it in the whole county. Then does the city have to come back later and have a vote on it also?
Well, no, the county can ask the question, but it accomplishes the same thing for the city. So if they ask the voters, do you want to prohibit marijuana businesses? And the voters outside the city limits say, yes, we want to prohibit. And the voters inside the city limits say, no, say the opposite thing, then we have to listen to the voters in the city. And the voters outside of the city can say and do something different.
Follow up, Mayor, please.
Go ahead.
So that'll be, if the county does it that way, there'll be 2 questions on the ballot by the county.
There may not be. They will decide how they want to ask the question.
Yeah, if they do it countywide, then that includes the city of Billings. But if they split it, then there'll be a vote for the citizens of Billings and the rest of the county.
It's just the way they count and tabulate the votes. They'll, as they're counting, they'll say, this is a city voter, this is a county voter, and county voters decided this, and the city voters decided that.
One more follow-up, please. And when is the drop dead date to get this on the ballot?
We need to submit it to the elections administrator by August 9th. That is the absolute last drop deadline.
So you were saying that the county's going to decide on August 3rd, but that gives us till August 9th when we have our meeting. Well, our meetings after their business hours are closed. So how are we going to do it? If the county doesn't decide anything till August 3rd, our next business meeting is August 9th. But it doesn't start till 5:30. So we're not going to get it in time then. So we got to get something decided.
Right, I apologize, Councilmember Neese. The statute allows the city to pass a resolution on as long as there's 85 days prior. So August 9th, if we pass a resolution on August 9th and submit it, we can submit it the next day. As long as your resolution is dated and issued on August 9th, then we meet the deadline.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. On the timing issue, and I apologize, it'll go to Councilmember Yakovich, but while we're just on that timing issue, we're governed by that. If we initiate this by resolution, there's also the petition option by the electors themselves. And I don't know how many signatures would be needed, but is that process governed by the same 85-day limitation?
I do not have the answer to that because I have not even looked at the petition process at this point, but I certainly can give you
Yeah, we
that
probably
information.
should, because the electors themselves may be interested in knowing if the city council does not act in a way that the petition signers might like. They could act, and it'd be nice if we could educate them on what deadlines might be out there. So, and ourselves. Councilmember Yakovich.
Thank you, Honored Council. I was just curious with the committee, one of our goals was to be able to look at zoning and some of those things. Am I on target here?
Yes. Okay. Yes, and Councilmember Ronning raised the issue of, are we doing that in conjunction with this group? So Gina, can you just comment on the regulatory aspect?
Yes, thank you for the question, Councilmember Yakovich. The committee unfortunately hasn't been able to actually discuss those regulatory issues yet, like zoning and licensing. That is one of our main goals, and so I anticipate we'll have another meeting to begin that process and start talking about what kind of regulations the committee would like to see. So while we potentially pursue this ballot issue, we will concurrently pursue the regulatory aspect as well. We just, unfortunately, our first two meetings, we didn't get there.
Thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.
Committee, thank you for your hard work.
Councilor Pearson?
I just wanted to address, Penny, what you were talking about with the voters on 190. It was an initiative process. And I think that's the big crux, is for everyone really to understand that initiative process. You have to have so many signatures for it to be presented on the ballot. And it's my understanding there are, I think, 3 individuals that help with that ballot language. One of them was non-legislative, and I think it was the folks who were promoting this. And there were so many things with the language of that I think that's one reason why it doesn't look like 701. So my biggest thing with it was that it was a ballot and initiative, and that's a different one. And the legislators saw that, and so it was supposed to be a high bar sort of element to use an initiative process. And now they're looking at raising that bar again, which means they will have to have more signatures. And, you know, the thing that I think is interesting is that they're still working on it. I mean, you still have legislators that are working on it. They're working on the medical marijuana aspect of it because it's never been regulated to the extent that they said that it was supposed to be regulated. So that's what's interesting to me about this whole process, is that I can't believe that we can even go through this and the bill is totally unclear. But I guess that's out of our hands. But thank you.
Any other questions for staff? The HEART fund is funded through state tax revenue, can be used for substance abuse mitigation, anti-smoking campaigns, things like that. I was curious whether a county or city that prohibits sale and hence does not put money into the coffers of the state is therefore disqualified from receiving those HEART dollars. But when I actually looked at it, I didn't see that. So do we know at this point how our ability to access HEART dollars, HEART fund dollars might or might not be impacted by this? I don't know, but maybe you do.
Mayor, unfortunately, I don't know, and that's because Mr. Kukulski said he was pursuing that aspect of it, so I'm not sure if he filled in Mr. Iflin or not, and if Kevin does shaking his head, he can't answer that either, so we'll have to get that answer from Mr. Kukulski when he returns.
Okay, thank you. Other questions before we go to public comment? Not seeing any, so thank you, Gina, and for your staff, Karen. So this is the opportunity for anyone in the audience who would like to comment on our discussion or recreational and medical marijuana generally, to please come forward and do so. So please feel free, come forward, tell us your name and address. Just ask you keep your comments to 3 minutes and welcome.
Hello, Mayor, Council members. Steve Zabawa, Director of Safe Montana. We're against illegal drugs being promoted in our communities. 810 Bluegrass Place, Billings, Montana. Got some interesting things going on in this deal. Number one, what are you going to put on the ballot if you do put it on there, right? The current one, this is the actual I-190 that you were referring to. Right? And it's very interesting how it was written. And the Attorney General, Secretary of State, and the Governor's Office, and Safe Montana, it was right in the middle of COVID. We didn't even know what was going on for the most part. And we missed a lot of things when it went through the process. So I'd highly suggest that we really do a good job on whatever's going to be on the ballot, that it's nice and clear and constitutional. So you cannot appropriate and allocate money in a ballot initiative. Okay, that's Article 3, Section 4, super simple. It's clear. But what happened in this was 10.5% goes to the state general fund of the 20%, X amount goes to healthcare, X amount goes to conservation programs for fish and wildlife, X amount go to veteran services. That's not the purpose of a ballot initiative. Normally you put it on a purpose is recreational marijuana, yes or no, up or down, okay? That wasn't the case in this one. So I really feel that the voters in Billings, Montana and Yellowstone County got snookered in a big way. Okay, they were promised a lot, and then what did the governor do in the House and the Senate, right, when it got up there? They took all that money away from the conservation groups and all sorts of different things, right? Then they were fighting to try to get it back, and it was a fist fight over revenue, but nobody ever talked about what it does to your community. Now, you're talking about putting a mill levy up right now for what? To take care of drug abuse and all the things that happen in our, how our different departments are, impacted, right? So I don't know if you've really factored in recreational marijuana like Denver, Seattle, and Portland. Go look at those cities and go look at the tents and the mission homes and all the issues that go on there since they went to recreational marijuana. So you really need to think about those things. I think this is a great redo opportunity to make sure our community gets a straight shot at a yes or a no on recreational marijuana. And then make sure the education's out there to really tell them exactly, did you know that it takes, before we get $1 at the state level, that we're going to spend $7 million of our taxpayers' money in the state to implement it? So in other words, nobody said that to me. We're going to spend $7 million with Deloitte Touche and everybody to bring these things on. So how much money are we going to need to bring on recreational marijuana in this city, in this county? I don't know if you've factored that into your discussions yet.
Go ahead and wrap up.
It's all right. 26 counties are not in recreational marijuana. 65% of Colorado is not in recreational marijuana. So it's done at a city level, at a municipality level. That was added into House Bill 701, was the opportunity for the city and the county to get in or get out. Okay, so you can do it as many times as you want through a public vote. So I thought that was very important. And remember, it was 42,000 to 41,000 was the vote in the county. Okay, I'm not even telling you which way it was. It was really close. So I think putting it up for a redo on a straight deal will give you the direction that you need to handle this issue. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item?
I'm Susan Sullivan. I've already given you my address. I'm multi-purposing tonight. I am opposed to the recreational use of marijuana in the city of Billings. We have talked about the Fifth Avenue project. We have talked about homelessness. We have talked about the beautification of the city, and particularly downtown Billings. Sometimes all we need to do is go back in history and take a look. But this history lesson is 5 minutes ago, and it's called San Francisco. We were in San Francisco a couple of months ago at a convention, 28,000 people at the convention. The trustees at the convention voted never to come back to San Francisco because they were hearing too many complaints from members like me who attended the convention. I could not even walk out the door of the hotel to go down 2 blocks because I wanted to go shopping. I had to have the security take me, because I was walking by myself, take me to the store. Couldn't get in the store because all I could smell was marijuana and feces. You could not get into the store to go shopping and spend money. We have some really nice hotels here in downtown Billings and in this city. And the same thing will happen here. Keep the city the way it is, the Fifth Avenue project, help with the homeless. Yes, we can do all those types of things. We do not need to add another vice to this city. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on item number 4? Any other public comment? Do not see any, so we'll close the public comment. Council, before we adjourn or go to items of general council discussion, any other closing thoughts, comments? Councilmember Iflin, or Councilmember Iflin. Don't want to insult you in that way. City Administrator Kevin Iflin.
Thanks, Mayor and Council. Just 2 points. City Administrator Kukulski's been texting me a little bit during this, and so I can clarify a couple points now. Number one, he has reached out to the governor's chief policy advisor about the HART and the effects on that, and he's not heard back from them, so no updates on that. And in conversations with the county commissioners in regards to the ballot language and that, his conversations with them, they're not likely to include medical marijuana in that type of ballot language, that would be taken out of there, so there would not be that component of it. So I just wanted to relay those 2 points.
Thank you very much.
Could you say that again?
On the ballot language, his conversations with the county commissioners, they're not likely to include medical marijuana on the ballot language.
Meaning that since it would not be included, it would not be subject to being prohibited. In other words, it would continue.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Anything else, Council? Don't see Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Gina, just a real quick clarification. Regardless of what we do, let's say we put all 7 on and it was voted that we prohibited in the city, and I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but assuming that we prohibit it all, or the county puts a question forward and they say no, and both city and county say no, they're going to, or yes, they want to prohibit it, it's still legal in the state, correct?
It is.
And so they can still, so marijuana, regardless, marijuana is going to be present in our city. And so the police dogs that we have, we still face the same issues with our police dogs. We can't use them for searching for marijuana drugs and stuff like that, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
There's still the allowable amounts to use and possess.
Okay,
for individuals.
so the only way, if the citizens of Billings really did not want it, the only way to do that is to overturn it at the state level, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Council will move on then to any items of general council discussion. Before we go to public comment on non-agenda items, any items of general council discussion? Councilmember Ronning.
I've asked Wyeth, and Gina can comment too. I just wanted to share with the city council and with the public and wanted to thank the council members that attended the information session. The city of Billings hosted a 2-day workshop with the organization Collective Liberty out of Washington, D.C., and it was to help train different city departments as well as a county code enforcement on the massage and spa facility license that is now in effect in the city. And I've asked Wyeth, and if Gina wants to comment, would welcome that too. So just wanted to share which departments were part of the training, and that was planning, code enforcement, fire, police, who am I missing? Oh, city attorney, yeah, city legal, and am I missing anyone else, Wyeth? Okay, and then county. Oh, and finance, that's right, and finance, yep, exactly. And then the county code enforcement officer attended as well. Absolutely dynamic training. And also we had the State Department of Justice, one of the state agents attended, as well as a special agent, FBI Special Agent Brandon Walter also attended. And I will just share a couple of comments that both one of the state agents and I shared, and I need to share this with Wyeth also, but I shared it with Detective Scaramucci. Both the state agent and I, we've been to thousands of these kinds of trainings all over. And both of us came away saying this was absolutely the best we'd been to. So I just really wanted to thank Wyeth. He organized that, and thank the city council members that attended. Absolutely dynamic training, and just give you a little bit of an eye opener. The morning of the second day of the training, Detective Scaramucci, who, he's out of Waco, Texas, and is probably one of the most renowned in our country for the number of traffickers he's taken down. And he works with task forces all throughout the country. And he has actually a case here in Montana as well. Anyway, the second day of the training, that morning, he created a fake ad for an illicit massage business here in Billings. He placed it on a website that's hosted out of Europe. This was one ad, one fake ad placed on a website out of Europe. He published, when we got to watch this in real time, he hit send, the ad went up on the website. Within, 5-10 minutes, the calls started coming in, and they didn't stop coming in. They came in over and over and over again, and they were still coming in that evening. We were able to watch Detective Scaramucci, and we interacted as a class. The callers who were from Billings did not know that we were a class and did not know that it was a detective on the other end. They assumed that they were speaking and communicating with one of the females in the fake ad. These gentlemen knew every single emoji identification. They knew the letter identification for the different sexual acts that could be requested. These men knew exactly what they were communicating and the phone number that they were calling and what they were planning to get. And the first level of service started at $150, and it did not matter to these men that were communicating. But if Wyeth wants to share anything, he's more than welcome to. But I just really wanted to extend an extraordinary thanks to Wyeth and the city. And there were a number of departments that needed to be there, and Gina and I had talked about that, as well as some of the other different members of law enforcement have talked about that also. So we hope to bring collective liberty back and broaden that training again to county prosecutors, more of our Billings Police Department. We've had that request already come in, and just broaden the capacity of who can be in that room. So, but just really wanted to thank Wyeth and the team for putting that together.
Wyeth.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Ronnie, and I'll just be really brief, and Mayor and Council. Yes, and that was our first training, so it's good to hear comparisons with, with other agencies and such that have been through other training, because it did go very well and was very thorough, and we really got a lot of the perspective that we needed. I just wanted to mention, on the code enforcement officer side specifically, really coming out of that training, and actually we did an inspection today, and I won't go into the details, but the first one where we were using all the materials in the ordinance, and it was an interesting situation, and we'll see where that goes. But the officers who came out of the training, all of them, because we had them all there, who are going to be involved in this, were felt, I think, a lot more understanding of all the things that are going on and what they're dealing with, and how this ordinance, what it can do, and the tools that we have available through that to deal with the illicit businesses that are out there. So I think that was really encouraging for me to have those conversations with them. And then also absolutely the discussions we had with coordination. To have the state agent from DCI propose that we should be having some communication with them, with police, with code enforcement on a regular basis as this develops. To have them propose that was exactly what I was going to propose. So it was great to have that kind of discussion right there in the room. So anyway, thanks again, for making, everyone who helped make it possible. Collective Liberty was very easy to work with and coordinate, and they've certainly rolled out the carpet in terms of as we go forward now, and if we have questions and inquiries that we can work with them. So thank you. And
Mayor, may I add one more thing? I think one of the things that was really fascinating to all of us in that training, in the skills that we learned, and I was so proud of the city legal department. That one attorney, boy, she was on top of it, wasn't she? The next day, we learned the skills and we put them to use. She was able, in what she had learned, she was literally able, in that time we were in that classroom, she was able to find through open source material, she linked back one what we believe to be an illicit business here in Billings. She linked that back, and she just coordinated, connected, where she was able to link that back to the money going to China to organized crime. And which is what we were learning, and it really was fascinating, but she was able to connect one business here in Billings back to the money going to China, to the organized crime bosses in China. So, yeah, it was fascinating.
Thank you for that report. That really is fascinating. If there's another training, might be nice to invite a representative or two from just the legitimate massage industry so that they see this dark side of people using their terminology. Councilmember Yakovich, and then Councilmember Tree.
Thank you for all of you went to that. That's very good. I don't want to ground us too much, but I want to just refer us to this porta potty because I got a few calls. You know, whenever we get one call, it's a lot of calls. So I got a call from one of my constituents, a wonderful gentleman who is part of a group of retired police officers. And they were kind of concerned about this, really retired. They were, and they were asking me about the porta potty. So Joe Stout went out of his way to give me some great information on it. And I just wanted to let you know that, because it was helpful for them too, the police officers, there's actually sewer. There's going to be sewer in this porta potty. You probably know all this already, but as all of you are smarter than me, then I have to go over this. And sewer is there, so it'll be plugged into sewer, it'll be cemented in, so that's cool. The water, like washing hands and all that, will be outside, not inside. There's certain lighting, a blue lighting, so that people cannot do intravenous drugs in that kind of lighting. It's lockable, so it could be locked during the night or at certain times if it's being misused. And it's easy, it's visible, very visible. So just some basic things that I thought were good for me to review. And when I shared it with some of the gentlemen, they were more pleased to see that. It's federal money, so it's our money, but it's not coming from the city. And they haven't decided where to put it. I think they're working with Mr. Friday and others on location and a proper location that will be safe for accommodable for everybody. So anyway, that's just an update. We actually have five porta potties around the city. I counted 4 so far. I'm hunting them all out, but you know, there's a number of them already, and we may keep them as well, but they're just a different kind of facility. So I'm appreciating this more and appreciating Joe's Stout, his outreach to me on this. So just wanted to give you that update.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Trickey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, so when we were talking about the Stillwater building the other day, agreeing to the purchasing or the purchase agreement, whatever it is, Councilman Ronning brought up something that I hadn't thought through, and that is how exactly are we going to pay for it? The assumption to this point, I think, has been that we are going to just to use the money that's in the reserve, but I think it probably is a good idea for us to be thinking about it and be prepared to get into it in a little bit more detail. Frankly, I don't think we should use all the reserves on this, so I think we need to leave some of it in there. I also think that we need to leave some money in the reserves because the pandemic isn't done with us, and we may have some unexpected costs next year. And also, personally, I'd like to see some of that money being set aside for parks and trails. So, I think that I think we need to be thinking about it, and do you know when we're going to be talking about actually making a decision about how we're paying for it? I assume it's coming up in the next couple of months.
Yeah, Councilmember Shariki, I believe August 23rd is when we plan on bringing that back to council, or somewhere right in there with the contingency removal phase of the purchase agreement. And then we can discuss further at that time the financing also.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. On that topic, Kevin, I guess I'm assuming that Finance Department will show us not just total reserves available and impact there from the purchase price, but also then build out costs and the timing of that, so we can sort of see what the reserve situation might look like for the foreseeable future, whatever we define that to be, 2 to 5 years, I suppose. I know that would be helpful for me if we can see that kind of long-term funding picture.
Yeah, Mayor, absolutely. We'll show you that, in the financing option. If there's a direction that council would like to see as far as different financing option, I know prior to the pandemic, we were looking at putting some mills on the public safety levy, or if there's you'd like to look at the bonding issue or something of that, any direction like that that council could provide, it would help staff, kind of formulate that and be able to present that on August 23rd also.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Bernice?
Thank you, Mayor. Danny, thank you for bringing this up. Just a quick question for Gina on this. Gina, did the buy-sell have a contingency for bonding? I know initially we had talked about that, but did it have it in contingency for buy-sell? Yeah, for bonding? Do you recall that?
I do not recall that specific provision.
Okay, we
so
might
I
want to
don't-
just check that in case if we do want to actually go and bond some of it instead of using the whole reserves. But going back to your discussion, Danny, on that, I'd love to see those shelters at the parks put back in. There were some really good plans that the Heights community had to use those shelters to fundraise and hold outdoor public events and stuff like that. So yeah, I would love to see some of that money from reserves could put back into some one-time parks development.
Thank you. Anything else? Councilmember Ronning?
Thank you. So, no surprise. I think that if it's anything related to do with CARES Act or ARPA funds in such a big capacity like we've been talking, I think beyond a shadow of a doubt from me, I would like to see the public have input on how those funds are used. This is a pandemic that affected everyone in our community, not just city staff, not just the city, but everyone. And I think there are multiple options that can be used for those. And just from my perspective, I think it's important that the public have input on different options of how that funding could be used. My understanding of the RFP was that it would go out for a bond when it comes to a city hall. That discussion changed after the pandemic and the CARES Act and the ARPA dollars came in. All of a sudden, dollars became available. So I guess I'll just reiterate, I think the public needs to have input on how CARES Act and ARPA dollars are used and the options that the city could be using for those. So there's my input.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll just comment. I've received several phone calls from important nonprofits, organizations in our community who would like to put their dibs on those dollars for sure. There's no shortage of desire in that way. Okay, I think that's probably it, Council. So let's move on to public comment on non-agenda items. If you'd like to comment on anything that wasn't on our agenda tonight, please come forward, tell us your name, and keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Dennis Silvas at 3040 Central Avenue, A102. Probably in another month, I'll be giving you a different address, but it will still be in Ward 5. What I wanted to talk to you about that's not on the agenda, I know we have many boards and commissions here that we send out to the people that say, I want to serve on this board, I want to serve on this commission. But I thought about that a little bit. Some people, a lot of people are kind of shy about doing that. So I thought about, I think this would be a nice suggestion as council here goes across their ideas, their concepts, whatever they may be. I think when they do select an ad hoc committee on a certain subject, I think we should all the time have a concerned citizen on that board, you know, because that way it will show them they'll be part of, the city working, because I think that's a real good idea, because you will get a different perspective from a concerned citizen instead of going, okay, we want to elect a board or another person who wants to be on this committee. Then you go down the line, oh, I want to be on this committee. I want to be on this committee. Here you're having the same council all the time, and you're not having new concepts and new ideas, as I said, new blood, let's put it that way, on the council. So when you do come across something, no boards, no committees, but let's have a committee that's, that we don't have any boards or commissions on. Let's select a city council, a concerned citizen, because that will give a different perspective and that will give different and new ideas and new concepts. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on non-agenda items?
Kevin Nelson, 4235 Bruce Avenue. Again, Kevin Nelson, Chairman, Southwest Corridor Task Force. And I understand there was a little discussion last meeting about this, us not being, we're inactive, I guess as Danny put it. Well, we're inactive for a reason. We're inactive because we're a nonprofit, just like any other nonprofit, just like the city. As a chairman, I'm going to protect that corporation. I'm going to protect my board, and I'm not going to be exposed unnecessarily to liability. And so if there isn't so we don't have any money for insurance. And if we don't have insurance, we're not going to be a committee. We're not going to be a board. In the past, CBG funding funded and paid for the insurance. That was back when I was a secretary. So back then the board felt it was necessary to have insurance. The Spur, they have insurance. You can't even conduct business with the city without insurance. And so that's why we're inactive. I've asked, I don't know how many times, would you have a work session dedicated to the task forces? Tell us what you want. Tell us how we're supposed to be structured. Maybe there's a better structure than a nonprofit that would be you'd have less exposure. I'm not sure. What do you want from us? What do you need? What do you need? I mean, we don't exist except for the city. We don't do anything else. We work with the city. So, but we don't have any direction from the city. We don't have a plan. We don't have a policy. We don't have direction. We don't have anything. So we don't even know what we're essentially supposed to be doing. And you have all of these task forces that are sort of all off on their own, doing whatever they want to do as the planning department. Well, you're on your own. Well, okay. Well, is that where we're supposed to be? Do you really need task forces? I mean, now that the CBG funding is sort of, as I understand, has sort of gone away and it's not necessary, maybe task forces are just sort of a novelty thing that, you know, if you want to be one, be one. If you don't want to be one, good, see you later, bye. If someone wants to be a task force or you want to have a committee down on the Southwest Corridor, have one. But you haven't got anybody showing up. Haven't anybody showed up at your council meetings, you know? So trying to get public participation at these meetings is pretty tough. We ended up with it because Mike, the police officer, Lori and I were there. We probably attended every one of these task forces for years and years and years, but the participation was so low and it just sort of goes away. So I think we need a little, I don't know what we really need. I think we need really an honest discussion of where you really want us to be, and if you really want us, and if we're gonna be there, what's gonna be the structure, and what do you expect from us? But we've never had that, and I wish planning department would sort of give us some direction, you give us some direction, so everyone knows where we're at. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson, just out of curiosity, have you priced board errors and
I think it's
emissions
around
type of?
$1,800 to $2,200.
Okay.
Somewhere in there. You know, and I tell you, we went and got the application from our business insurance provider. It was eye-opening is when they started asking you questions. What are you going to do? I mean, what's your purpose of your board? What do you plan to, and so, you know, they're going to price that accordingly of what their exposure is and are you going to get into the zoning commission and zoning applications and, you know, what are you going to do here? And, you know, one of the things that opened our eyes the most is these Easter egg hunts. They want to know, are your volunteers, have they been trained? Do they know how to, all of this stuff, when you start acting with the public and kids and all of this stuff, holy Toledo. I mean, that was an eye-opener. And that was one of the things that said, wait a minute, is this something we really want to do? And so those were some of the questions. But again, we need some direction. I think all the task forces need a little bit of direction from the city of where we're really supposed to be going here. And hopefully you can do that.
Thank you, and I think there's sort of an annual task force training, Wyeth, that maybe you could get this on that agenda, or you want to comment? I guess it's kind of a redheaded stepchild, but you're the closest thing we have to a parent. So tell us about your children, please.
Yeah. Mayor and council, I guess, I don't know if I could go on for a while after what Kevin just said, so I'll try to be brief right now. So I guess first back to the training. Yes, we've had training. We were just talking about that at our adjacent neighborhood meeting last Thursday, which is a meeting of all the task force leaders, and Mr. Nelson and Lori were not there. And so I don't know, but they didn't attend that discussion. But that discussion, we were actually talking about the training. We did one in 2018. Obviously, we didn't do anything last year. And so we're talking about putting something together either late this year or after the election, when there's new council members, actually trying to sort of tie it around that in early 2022. So that is something we do. We try to do it every other year normally for the task forces and talk about their processes and whatnot. I guess I don't totally, so a couple things. Certainly there's been an ongoing conversation, and I've had it with you here in a couple different situations over the last couple of years about the task force city relationship. The council continues to allocate $12,000 a year to help support the task forces, but it's public money, and so it has to be fairly narrowly used. And I work with the task forces and with Robin Bartley in my office to help support them with that funding when in the places that it can be used, legally and such. Mainly mailings, supportive events. If they need a permit for an event in a park or something like that is kind of where that goes. So other than that, there's actually a legal opinion by the former city attorney, Brent Brooks, that basically said there is no tie to task forces directly with the city. There's no appointment by the city of task force members. Task forces form, they have their own bylaws, they operate independently, and that has been how it's been operating since I've been involved, aside from this tie with funding where there's some money available that the city continues to make available for certain support. So that's how it's been. The task forces are formed. Each one has their own setup. I have not, this discussion of having to have insurance. Yeah, we had a discussion a few years ago. We brought an attorney in. Brent Brooks came in, talked about what that looked like, and basically said, yeah, if task forces you want to have, if you think you need insurance, go get insurance. If you don't think you need it, it's not the city's obligation or connection to provide that or even to tell you whether you do or don't need it. And to be honest, I'm not sure if any of the existing ones have it, and maybe one or two do. I don't actually know, but it's not really been a big deal. They're all meeting, very active. We have a new one forming in Midtown. That's going forward. So I guess I'm not clear on where the hangup is with Southwest Corridor regarding that insurance, because clearly other task forces are operating and have been for years without it. So happy to have that discussion.
Would a task force be eligible for reimbursement if they thought they needed insurance? And I'm not one to say they don't, of this $12,000. I mean,
my understanding is no, that the city would not pay for their insurance from the conversations and what the former city attorney provided to us when we had that discussion. It was really, if you want to do that, that's on your effort. That's not something that the city's going to support. That was at that time, and we haven't had that discussion again. But that wasn't something that the city was saying, yeah, you can use that money to do, is to buy insurance for a nonprofit entity that the city's has no relationship with.
okay. Yeah. And I apologize, I don't want to belabor this, but do we make an effort to distribute that $12,000 evenly or on some formula between the task forces? So if we just gave them the money, they could use it for whatever they wanted, or maybe at the end of the year, they'd have to account for it just to make sure or something. You see the question, mm-hmm. I mean.
Yeah, no, Mayor and council members, actually, that's been a conversation we've had for several years with them. about, well, first of all, yes, we try to make sure that no one task force is using all the money. We try to be careful and watch who's using it for expenses and who's not. Some simply don't come and don't ask, but we still try to be careful that we have it available so that if they did decide to, we can't say, oh, well, we gave it all to this other one. So we work to do that, but there's been a conversation, and I've had that with them, and they've been open to this to say, you know what, we'll just split it, roughly 8 ways, 9 ways if we have a new one. Maybe set a little bit aside for training, for something that benefits all of them, and then each of them gets an allocation. We've talked about that. We've also talked about some kind of competitive process where in which, they would apply for events and projects to get the money, and then it would be allocated that way. We haven't acted on that specifically. The divvying up like per task force of a certain amount, at the time, they all were open to doing that, if that was something that the city wanted to do. But we've seen some are very technologically advanced and are doing everything electronically pretty much, so they're not doing mailings. A few are still doing some mailings, but it's really changed that. So that money tends to not all get used, but we try to be careful to make sure it's available for whoever wants it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I, for one, have no problem with their using those dollars for insurance, but that's just me. Other comments, Councilmember Ronnie?
Can I ask you a question, Martha? And this goes back to one of Kevin's comments, and I will share, this is something I don't know. Do the task forces themselves determine what their purpose is? Because I know the Rimrock Neighborhood Task Force has a very specific purpose, which has to do with the Inner Belt Loop and the protection of Zimmerman Trail. Do the other task forces do they determine what their purpose is, or is that something that planning does? How does that work?
Yeah, Councilmember Ronning and Mayor and Council, yes, they do determine what their purpose is, where they want to focus their energies. Like I said, they draft their bylaws and operate under those bylaws. And so, yeah, our role really, at least in the last few years since I've been involved in this, is first of all to try to provide that support with that funding and make sure we're doing it legally and the money's being spent, per city, what city funds should be spent for to support them. But other than that, it's to facilitate the training. It's to have every quarter an adjacent, bring them all together and let them talk. And last Thursday, we went around, everyone gives an update on what they're doing. And there's a lot going on, but they're doing all their own things in their own areas. But we also try to facilitate information flow. So obviously the police department's done an excellent job. They go to those meetings on an absolutely regular basis and give reports. But we also then we'll, as an example, coming up in one of the next 2 quarterlies, it'll probably be the next one, timing with the CIP, we'll have staff come in and talk about the CIP process. We have staff talk about CDBG process. And so we try to ask them as we're doing those quarterlies and such, are there some topics you want to hear about? We also Thursday offered, after talking with City Administrator Kukulski, public safety levy presentations. Yes, a bunch of them would like those in the next couple meetings. So we're going to help coordinate that. So that's really what we've been doing. But they do a lot on their own, and some of them do very robust, meetings and topics and everything on their regular meeting schedule. And we only help them if they really need it, and we put all that information out for people to get a hold of.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Council, I'm ready to adjourn if you are. And I don't see any objections, so thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.